Welcome to my humble little channel. If you're looking for something to listen to before bed or a chilling story for tonight, you're in the right place. Before we begin, don't forget to leave a like and a comment. Let's reach 1,000 likes and 1,000 comments. Thank you for your support and enjoy the stories. They say you don't really know fear until it knows you. I didn't quite understand that saying until October of 2001, when I was stationed at Great Smoky Mountains National Park. My name is Emery Carpenter, and I've been a park ranger for close to 7 years now. I don't say this for any reason other than the fact that in those 7 years I've seen a lot. I'm not one for exaggerations, but I've watched people fall off cliffs, found hikers lost in the woods for days, and even helped relocate some black bears who got a little too comfortable raiding campgrounds. But nothing prepared me for what I stumbled across that autumn. Great Smoky is massive, you know, and beautiful too. You've got your ancient trees, waterfalls, fog-covered mountains. It's the kind of place people go to escape the noise of the world. It's also a place where you can get turned around real quick if you're not paying attention. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when I got the call. I was just finishing up some paperwork in the ranger station, sipping on my third cup of coffee, when Carla, our dispatch officer, poked her head into my office. "Hey, Emery, we've got a situation," she said, her usual cheerful tone tinged with concern. "Got an overdue camper report. Guy named Douglas Hartley, mid-50s, apparently a seasoned hiker. He's been out of touch for about 2 days." I nodded, reaching for the file she was holding out. "Standard stuff," I replied, flipping through the pages. Usually it's someone who wandered off the beaten path, twisted an ankle, or got turned around after dusk. But as I read further, my brow furrowed. "Wait, he wasn't alone?" Carla shook her head. "That's where it gets weird. He'd been camping with 2 friends, but neither of them have shown up in town for supplies like they were supposed to." I stood up, grabbing my jacket. "All right, I'll head out to check it out." "Which trailhead?" "They were last seen heading up the Appalachian Trail from Newfound Gap," Carla replied. "Hartley's truck is still in the parking lot there." As I headed out, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the unusual silence in the woods that morning, or the way the mist seemed to cling to the trees more stubbornly than usual. Whatever it was, it set my nerves on edge. I'm not exactly the gun-toting type. I've always figured my voice and a good flashlight could get me out of most situations, and if not, well, that's what backup was for. But as I drove towards Newfound Gap, I found myself wishing I had more than just my standard-issue gear. The parking lot was deserted when I arrived, save for a single truck parked crookedly in the dirt. Hartley's vehicle sat there like a lone gravestone, a silent testament to the missing hikers. I did a quick check of the truck. Locked, with no signs of forced entry or struggle, just an abandoned vehicle waiting for its owner's return. As I stepped onto the trail, the silence hit me again. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of leaves under my boots. I tried to shake off the growing sense of unease. After all, I was here to find some lost hikers, not to get spooked by an unusually quiet forest. Little did I know, as I set off down that familiar trail, that I was walking into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. The Appalachian Trail stretched before me, a ribbon of earth winding through the ancient forest. I'd walked this path countless times before, but never had it felt so wrong. The air was thick with an oppressive stillness, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. 2 miles in, I came across the first sign of the missing hikers, a campsite nestled in a small clearing just off the main trail. But something was off. The fire pit was cold, ashes long since settled. The tent looked like it had been left in a hurry, its entrance flap torn and fluttering weakly in the barely there breeze. I approached cautiously, my senses on high alert. "Hello?" I called out, more out of protocol than any real expectation of an answer. "Park ranger, anyone here?" Silence was my only reply. Stepping closer, I peered into the tent. Sleeping bags were unzipped and crumpled in a heap, as if their occupants had leapt up in a panic. A backpack lay on its side, contents spilled across the tent floor, energy bars, a map, a flashlight still switched on but with batteries long dead. I keyed my radio. "Carla, you there? I've found their campsite." Static crackled in response. I frowned, tapping the device. "Carla? Do you copy?" Nothing. I pocketed the radio with a sigh. Reception could be spotty out here, but it was rarely this bad. Another detail to add to the growing list of things that felt off about this whole situation. As I continued to investigate the campsite, a chill ran down my spine. There were no footprints leading away from the site, no clear sign of which direction the hikers might have gone. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. But the most unsettling thing? The quiet. In all my years as a ranger, I'd never experienced anything like it. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing, not even the whisper of wind through the trees. It was as if all wildlife had fled the area, leaving behind this eerie vacuum of sound. I found myself checking over my shoulder more often than usual, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The trees seemed to loom closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, ready to snatch at any unwary passerby. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, painting the forest in long shadows, I knew I had to make a decision. Standard procedure would be to mark the location and head back, return with a search team at first light, but something in my gut told me that waiting wasn't an option. Whatever had happened to Hartley and his friends, I had a sinking feeling that time was of the essence. With a deep breath, I switched on my flashlight and stepped back onto the trail. The beam of light seemed feeble against the encroaching darkness, barely penetrating the thick canopy above. As I moved forward, deeper into the heart of the forest, I couldn't help but feel like I was walking into the jaws of some ancient, patient predator. Little did I know the true horrors of that night were just beginning to unfold. The deeper I ventured into the forest, the more oppressive the silence became. My flashlight beam danced across the trees, creating shifting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Every snapping twig under my feet sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. I'd hiked another mile or so past the abandoned campsite when the first coppery whiff hit my nostrils. At first I thought I might be imagining it, a trick of the mind in the growing darkness, but as I pressed on, the scent grew stronger, unmistakable. Blood, my heart began to race, hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I swept my flashlight in a wide arc, searching for the source of that sickening smell. And then, the beam caught something, a flash of pale skin against the dark forest floor. "Oh God," I whispered, my voice sounding alien even to my own ears. There, crumpled at the base of a massive oak, was a body. As I approached, my stomach churning, I recognized him from the photos in the file. Douglas Hartley. But what I saw, nothing could have prepared me for it. Hartley's body was twisted in a way that defied natural anatomy, his head wrenched at an impossible angle. But that wasn't the worst of it. His left arm was gone. Not severed, not cut. It was as if something had torn it straight from the socket. I've seen my share of animal attacks, but this was something else entirely. The violence of it, the sheer brutality, sent waves of nausea washing over me. I staggered back, fighting the urge to vomit. With trembling hands, I reached for my radio again. "Carla? Carla, do you copy? I need backup, now." Only static answered me. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I noticed something else. Drag marks in the soft earth, leading away from Hartley's body. And they were fresh. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run to the safety of my truck and call for reinforcements. But I knew I couldn't leave, not when there might be survivors. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself and followed the trail. It led me to a small clearing, and that's where I found the others. 2 more bodies, in a state that made Hartley look peaceful by comparison. They had been torn apart, limbs scattered like discarded toys. Deep gashes covered what remained of their torsos, but these weren't the marks of any animal I knew. The cuts were too precise, almost surgical in their placement. I knelt beside one of the victims, forcing myself to look closer. His face was frozen in a mask of terror, eyes wide and staring, mouth open in a silent scream. Whatever had done this, these people had seen it coming. As I stood, my legs shaky and weak, a twig snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond the clearing. I whirled around, my flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of something. A shape, dark and low to the ground, slinking between the trees. Too fast to make out details, but large, bigger than any mountain lion I'd ever seen. My blood ran cold. Whatever had killed these people, it was still out there. And now, it had noticed me. In that moment, I felt more human, more vulnerable than I ever had before. The forest that had been my workplace, my second home for years, suddenly became alien and hostile. Every shadow concealed a potential threat, every rustle of leaves a harbinger of death. I took a step back, then another. And that's when I heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't the sound of any animal I knew. It was deeper, almost guttural, with an intelligence behind it that sent shivers down my spine. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush with reckless abandon. Branches whipped at my face. Roots threatened to trip me at every step, but I didn't slow down. I could feel it behind me, not heard but sensed, a malevolent presence closing in with every labored breath I took. As I ran, the forest seemed to come alive around me, shadows reaching out with grasping tendrils, the very trees themselves appearing to shift and move to block my path. Whether it was real or just my panicked mind playing tricks, I couldn't tell. All I knew was that I had to get out, had to reach my truck before whatever was hunting me caught up. The next few minutes were a blur of terror and exertion. Somehow I found myself back at the parking lot, my truck a blessed sight in the gathering gloom. I threw myself into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys, the growl I'd heard in the forest still echoing in my ears. As the engine roared to life and I peeled out of the lot, tires kicking up gravel, I caught one last glimpse in my rearview mirror. A pair of eyes reflecting the red glow of my taillights, watching from the tree line. Inhuman eyes, filled with a cold, calculated hunger that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. I'd like to say I did the right thing, that I went straight to the station, reported what I'd seen, organized a search party, but I didn't. I drove straight home, locked the doors, and sat there in the dark, shaking like a leaf, trying to make sense of what I'd just experienced. As the adrenaline wore off and exhaustion set in, one thought kept repeating in my mind. Whatever was out there in those woods, it wasn't finished, and somehow I knew it would be coming for me next. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those mangled bodies, heard that inhuman growl. The rational part of my brain tried to make sense of it all. Maybe it was a bear, driven to unusual aggression by hunger or disease. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. What I'd seen out there was something else entirely. As the first rays of dawn crept through my windows, I finally mustered the courage to check my phone. Dozens of missed calls and messages, all from the ranger station. With trembling fingers, I dialed Carla's number. "Emery, where the hell have you been?" Her voice was a mixture of relief and anger. "We've been trying to reach you all night." My voice cracked, and I had to clear my throat before continuing. "I found them, Carla. Hartley and his friends. They're dead." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Carla spoke again, her voice was softer, laced with concern. "What happened out there, Emery?" I opened my mouth to explain, but where could I even begin? How could I describe the horror of what I'd seen, the bone-deep terror I'd felt? In the harsh light of day, it all seemed so surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't quite shake. I'm not sure," I finally managed. "It was dark, and I need to come in, file a report." "All right," Carla said, clearly not satisfied but willing to wait for a full explanation. "But Emery, there's something else you should know. We've had more reports come in. 3 more bodies were found by some hikers further up the trail. Same condition as Hartley and his friends according to the preliminary reports." My blood ran cold. It wasn't over. Whatever was out there, it was still hunting. I arrived at the ranger station an hour later, having taken the time to shower and change. I hoped it would help me feel more like myself, more in control. It didn't. The station was a hive of activity. Park police, search and rescue teams, even a couple of suits that I guessed were from some higher law enforcement agency. All eyes turned to me as I walked in, conversations dying mid-sentence. Chief Ranger Hodges, a grizzled veteran of the Park Service, beckoned me into his office. As I sat down across from him, I could see the worry lines etched deep in his weathered face. "All right, Carpenter," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened out there. Leave nothing out." So I told him everything. The eerie silence in the woods, the abandoned campsite, the mutilated bodies. I described the creature I'd glimpsed, the terrifying chase through the darkened forest. As I spoke, I could see the disbelief in Hodges' eyes slowly give way to something else. Concern, maybe even fear. When I finished, Hodges leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. "Jesus, Emery," he muttered. "In all my years, I've never heard anything like this." "What do we do, sir?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. Hodges was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Finally, he spoke. "We investigate. We treat this like any other incident, gather evidence, interview witnesses, try to piece together what happened. But," he added, fixing me with a stern look, "we keep the details under wraps for now. No need to start a panic." I nodded, relieved to have a plan of action, something to focus on besides the lingering terror. "One more thing," Hodges said as I stood to leave. "I'm assigning you a partner for this investigation, Riley Foster, one of our new transfers. Fresh out of training but sharp as a tack. I think a set of unbiased eyes might be helpful here. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. A young woman entered, her ranger uniform crisp and new. She had an air of eager competence about her, but as our eyes met, I saw a flicker of something else. Doubt? Suspicion? Ranger Foster, meet Emery Carpenter, Hodges said. You two will be working this case together. As we shook hands, I couldn't help but wonder, was Hodges assigning her to help me or to keep an eye on me? Either way, I had a feeling things were about to get a lot more complicated. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a mystery that would push us both to the very limits of sanity and survival. Riley Foster and I spent the next few days combing through every scrap of evidence we could find. We revisited the crime scenes, now cordoned off with yellow police tape that seemed absurdly out of place in the ancient forest. The bodies had been removed, but the lingering sense of wrongness remained. So this is where you saw it? Riley asked as we stood at the edge of the clearing where I'd encountered the... whatever it was. Her tone was neutral, but I could sense the underlying skepticism. Yeah, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Right over there, between those trees. Riley nodded, jotting something down in her notebook. And you're sure it wasn't a bear? Or maybe a mountain lion? I shook my head vehemently. No way. This was something else. Bigger, faster. And the way it moved, it was almost like it was intelligent. She raised an eyebrow at that but didn't comment further. Instead, she knelt down, examining the ground where I'd seen the creature. No tracks, she muttered, more to herself than to me. As we continued our investigation, interviewing local hikers and campers, a pattern began to emerge. People reported strange noises in the night, glimpses of something large moving through the trees, animals acting strangely, fleeing areas they normally inhabited. And always that oppressive silence that seemed to follow in the creature's wake. But hard evidence remained frustratingly elusive. No clear tracks, no fur or tissue samples. Just the mutilated bodies and a growing sense of dread among the park staff and visitors. As the days wore on, I could feel the strain starting to show. I wasn't sleeping well, plagued by nightmares of those inhuman eyes watching me from the darkness. Every shadow, every unexpected sound made me jump, and I could tell Riley was starting to notice. Emery, she said one evening as we were reviewing our notes back at the station, are you sure you're okay to continue with this investigation? Maybe you should take some time off, get some rest. I bristled at the suggestion. I'm fine, I snapped, perhaps more harshly than I intended. We need to figure this out before anyone else gets hurt. Riley held up her hands in a placating gesture. Okay. I'm just concerned, that's all. You've been through a traumatic experience. I softened a bit at that. I appreciate it, Riley. Really. But I need to see this through. She nodded, then hesitated for a moment before speaking again. There's something else. I've been doing some research into the history of the park, looking for any similar incidents. My interest piqued. And, well, nothing exactly like this. But there are stories, old legends from the Cherokee who used to inhabit these lands. They speak of a creature they called the Uktena. Uktena. The word felt strange on my tongue. Riley nodded. It's described as a kind of horned serpent or dragon. But here's the interesting part. Some accounts say it could shapeshift, take on different forms to lure its prey. I felt a chill run down my spine. You think that's what we're dealing with? Some kind of mythical creature? She shrugged. I'm not saying I believe in monsters, Emery. But something is out there, something that doesn't fit any normal explanation. I think we need to consider all possibilities, no matter how outlandish they might seem. As much as I wanted to dismiss the idea, I couldn't shake the feeling that Riley might be onto something. Whatever was stalking the forests of Great Smoky, it was far from ordinary. Our conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. We rushed to the window to see a crowd gathering in the parking lot. At its center was a man, wild-eyed and disheveled, gesticulating frantically as he spoke to Chief Hodges. That's Warren Kemp, Riley said, recognition in her voice. He's a local guide, been leading tours in the park for decades. We hurried outside to join the group. As we got closer, I could hear snippets of Warren's frantic speech. Biggest damn thing I've ever seen. Moved like lightning, I'm telling you. Snatched up a full-grown deer like it was nothing. Hodges was trying to calm him down. All right, Warren, take it easy. Start from the beginning. What exactly did you see? Warren took a deep breath, his eyes darting nervously to the tree line visible beyond the parking lot. I was leading a group up near Klingman's Dome. We were on our way back down when we heard this awful sound, like nothing I've ever heard before. Then we saw it. He paused, shuddering at the memory. It was huge, Chief. Black as night, but wrong somehow. like its shape kept shifting. It came out of nowhere, grabbed a deer that was grazing nearby, and disappeared back into the trees. My group, they all ran. I don't even know if they all made it back. A murmur ran through the crowd. I exchanged a glance with Riley, seeing my own mix of fear and determination reflected in her eyes. Hodges turned to address the gathered rangers. "All right, listen up. I want search parties organized immediately. We need to find Warren's group and make sure they're safe. And as of now, all hiking trails are closed. No one goes into those woods alone, understood?" As the crowd dispersed to carry out Hodges' orders, Riley pulled me aside. "This is escalating, Emery. Whatever's out there, it's getting bolder." I nodded grimly. "We need to end this, before anyone else gets hurt." "How?" Riley asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're not equipped to deal with something like this." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I knew we had to do. "We go after it, tonight. Just you and me." Riley's eyes widened. "Are you crazy? That's suicide." "Maybe," I admitted. "But we can't just sit back and wait for it to pick us off one by one. We know these woods better than anyone. We have a chance to end this, here and now." For a long moment, Riley just stared at me. Then, slowly, she nodded. "All right, but we do this smart. We prepare, we plan. And Emery," she grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "We watch each other's backs. No heroics, got it?" I managed a weak smile. "Got it." As we headed back to the station to prepare for our night hunt, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something far beyond our understanding. But we had no choice. The creature had to be stopped, no matter the cost. Little did we know, the true horror of what awaited us in the depths of the forest would test not just our courage, but our very sanity. The sun was sinking below the horizon as Riley and I made our final preparations. We had armed ourselves as best we could. High-powered rifles, sidearms, enough ammunition to take down a small army. But as I checked and rechecked my gear, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that against whatever was out there, our weapons might as well be water pistols. "Ready?" Riley asked, her face a mask of determination that didn't quite hide the fear in her eyes. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We slipped out of the ranger station, careful not to alert anyone to our unauthorized mission. The last thing we needed was Hodges trying to stop us or, worse, insisting on coming along. As we drove towards the trailhead where Warren had his encounter, the forest seemed to press in around us, darker and more menacing than I'd ever seen it. The trees loomed overhead, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, ready to snatch at any unwary passerby. We parked the truck and stepped out into the gathering gloom. The silence hit me immediately, that same unnatural quiet I'd experienced before. No crickets chirping, no owls hooting, just the sound of our own breathing and the crunch of leaves under our boots. "Jesus," Riley whispered, her eyes darting nervously from shadow to shadow. "It's so quiet." "Yeah," I replied, my voice barely audible. "It gets to you, doesn't it?" We started up the trail, our flashlights cutting thin beams through the darkness. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. I found myself constantly checking over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched. We had been hiking for about an hour when Riley suddenly grabbed my arm, pulling me to a stop. "Listen," she hissed. I strained my ears, at first hearing nothing but the pounding of my own heart. Then, faintly, I caught it, a low, rumbling sound, almost like a growl, but different. Deeper, more guttural, and there was something else in it, a sort of rhythmic quality that almost sounded like words. "What the hell is that?" Riley whispered, her grip on my arm tightening. Before I could answer, the sound cut off abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow even more terrifying than the growl had been. We pressed on, moving slower now, every sense on high alert. The trail wound deeper into the forest, the trees growing denser, the undergrowth thicker. Our flashlight beams seemed to grow weaker, barely penetrating the oppressive darkness. And then, without warning, we stepped into a clearing. The sudden open space was jarring after the claustrophobic density of the forest. But it wasn't the clearing itself that made us both stop dead in our tracks. In the center of the clearing stood a massive oak tree, its trunk easily 10 feet in diameter. But this was no ordinary tree. Its bark was scarred and twisted, forming patterns that looked disturbingly like faces frozen in screams of agony. And at its base, "Oh God," Riley choked out, her voice a mix of horror and disbelief. Scattered around the base of the tree were bones, hundreds of them gleaming white in the pale moonlight that managed to filter through the canopy. Some were clearly animal, deer, bear, maybe even mountain lion, but others were unmistakably human. As we stood there, frozen in shock. A sound came from behind us. A twig snapping, leaves rustling. We whirled around, rifles raised, to find nothing. Just the dark wall of the forest, impenetrable and menacing. "We need to get out of here," Riley said, her voice shaking. "Now," I nodded, unable to form words. We turned to leave, but something caught my eye. There, at the edge of our flashlight beams, was a shape. Dark, low to the ground, moving with a fluid grace that defied natural law. "Riley," I whispered, my throat dry. "Don't move." But it was too late. The shape lunged forward, faster than anything I'd ever seen. I caught a glimpse of gleaming eyes, razor-sharp teeth, and then it was on us. What followed was a chaos of noise and movement. Gunshots rang out, deafening in the previous silence. I felt something slam into me, sending me sprawling. I hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from my lungs. I scrambled to my feet, desperately searching for Riley. I caught sight of her backing away from something. It was hard to focus on, its shape seeming to shift and change even as I watched. One moment it looked like a massive wolf, the next more like a bear, but always with those terrible, intelligent eyes. "Riley!" I shouted, raising my rifle. But before I could fire, the creature was on her. There was a sickening crunch, a scream cut horrifyingly short, and then silence. I stood there, paralyzed with terror, as the creature turned its attention to me. Those eyes locked onto mine, and in that moment I knew true fear. This wasn't just an animal, wasn't just a predator. There was an ancient, malevolent intelligence in those eyes, something that had no place in our world. It began to move towards me, its form shifting and changing with each step. I raised my rifle, squeezing off shot after shot, but the bullets seemed to have no effect. It was like shooting at a shadow. As it closed in, I did the only thing I could. I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. Behind me, I could hear it coming, that otherworldly growl growing louder. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like lead. But still it pursued, always just behind me, toying with me like a cat with a mouse. And as I ran, the forest itself seemed to come alive around me. Trees shifted, blocking my path. Vines reached out to snag my ankles. It was as if the entire forest was working with the creature, trying to deliver me into its grasp. I don't know how long I ran, or how far. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that nightmarish chase. But eventually, miraculously, I burst out of the tree line and onto the road where we had parked our truck. I threw myself into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys. As the engine roared to life, I caught one last glimpse in the rearview mirror. There, at the edge of the forest, stood the creature. But now it had taken on a new form, one that sent ice through my veins. It was me. An exact copy, down to the ranger uniform and the wild look of terror on its face. But those eyes, those terrible, ancient eyes, remained the same. As I floored the accelerator, peeling away from that cursed place, the last thing I saw was my own face twisted into a grin of inhuman malice. I drove through the night, not stopping until I was miles away from the park. But even as the sun rose, bringing with it the illusion of safety, I knew the truth. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't finished with me. And someday, somehow, it would come for me again. For now, all I can do is warn others. If you find yourself in the Great Smoky Mountains, and the forest falls silent around you, run. Run, and don't look back. Because in those ancient woods, something waits. Something that knows your deepest fears. Something that can wear your face. And once it sets its sights on you, there's no escape. The fog rolled in thick over the Appalachian Mountains, cloaking the forest in a ghostly veil that early autumn morning. My name is Nolan Thorne, and I've been a park ranger here in West Virginia for the past 7 years. After serving 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Army, I traded the arid landscapes and constant tension for the vast, serene expanse of the Monongahela National Forest. The woods have a way of calming my hyper-vigilant mind, softening the edges of memories I'd rather forget. I like to think I've found my place among the ancient trees and hidden hollows. That crisp September day, I was scheduled to check on some remote trails near the Blackwater Falls area. It's a less traveled section of the park, which makes it my favorite. Untouched and wild, it reminds me why I fell in love with this job in the first place. I packed my gear methodically. First aid kit, radio, GPS, enough food and water for a day's hike, and my trusty Benchmade knife. A thermos of strong black coffee completed my preparations. As I locked up my small cabin on the outskirts of the ranger station, the sun was just beginning to peek over the ridgeline, casting long shadows through the mist. The air was cool and damp, carrying the earthy scent of decaying leaves and pine. I breathed deeply, letting the forest air fill my lungs, before setting out on the trail. The first few miles were familiar territory. I nodded a greeting to Mrs. Larson, an elderly birdwatcher who frequented the area, her binoculars already trained on a nearby stand of oaks. "Morning, Nolan," she called out cheerfully. "Keep an eye out for that barred owl nest I told you about. Should be about 3 miles in, just off the rhododendron trail." I promised I would, making a mental note. Mrs. Larson's keen eyes had helped us track several protected species over the years. As I continued deeper into the forest, the sounds of civilization faded away, replaced by nature's symphony, birds chirping their morning songs, leaves rustling in the gentle breeze, and the distant staccato tapping of a woodpecker hard at work. The trail grew steeper, winding its way up the mountainside. Sweat began to bead on my forehead despite the cool air. I paused to take a swig of water, surveying the vista that opened up before me. Miles of unbroken forest stretched to the horizon, a patchwork of green and gold as the earliest trees began their autumn transformation. It was moments like these that reaffirmed my decision to make this place my home. As midday approached, I reached a small clearing where wild asters and goldenrod painted the ground in bursts of purple and yellow. It seemed like a good place to take a break. I found a fallen log, brushed off some moss, and sat down to enjoy my lunch. The thermos of coffee was still warm, and I sipped it slowly, letting my mind wander. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong, something that shattered the tranquility of the forest. It was faint at first, barely audible over the rustle of leaves, but unmistakable, a scream. Human, filled with terror, echoing through the trees. I stood up quickly, nearly spilling my coffee, and strained to pinpoint the direction. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then it came again, more desperate this time, and abruptly cut off. My heart began to race, the familiar surge of adrenaline flooding my system. I grabbed my radio, clicking it on with shaking fingers. "Dispatch, this is Thorne. I'm about 8 miles east of Blackwater Falls near the old fire tower. I just heard what sounds like a distress call coming from the ridge to the north. Any hikers reported in that area?" The radio crackled, and dispatch responded. "Negative, Nolan. We don't have any permitted hikes in that section today. Proceed with caution. Do you need backup?" I hesitated, weighing the urgency of the situation against protocol. "Not yet. I'm going to investigate. I'll radio in if I find anything." "Over." "Copy that. Be careful out there, Thorne." I quickly packed up my gear and headed in the direction of the scream. The forest seemed different now, the friendly green canopy suddenly oppressive and dark. Shadows stretched longer between the trees, and every snapping twig under my boots made me flinch. As I moved, I began to notice signs of disturbance. Broken branches, trampled underbrush, a scrap of bright blue fabric snagged on a thorny bush. Then I found it, a backpack lying open on the forest floor, its contents spilled out haphazardly. Nearby, the ground was stained dark. I knelt down, touching the damp soil with trembling fingers. The coppery scent confirmed my fears. Blood, and fresh. I stood up quickly, every sense on high alert. The forest had gone eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. I unclipped my radio again. "Dispatch, I've found signs of a possible attack. Abandoned backpack and blood at my location. Request immediate backup and medical assistance." "Copy that, Nolan. Backup is en route. ETA 20 minutes. What's your situation?" I scanned the area, noting a faint trail of disturbed vegetation leading deeper into the woods. "I've got a potential blood trail heading north. Given the earlier distress call, we may have an injured hiker out here. I'm going to follow it." "Negative, Thorne. Wait for backup." I knew the smart move was to stay put, but the thought of someone out there, hurt and alone, made the decision for me. "Can't wait, dispatch. If someone's injured, they might not have 20 minutes. I'm proceeding with caution. We'll radio in at 5-minute intervals." Ignoring the protests from dispatch, I clicked off the radio and began to follow the trail. With each step deeper into the forest, an uneasy feeling grew in the pit of my stomach. Something about this didn't feel right. The shadows seemed to move at the corner of my vision, and more than once I spun around, certain I had heard footsteps behind me. The trail led to the edge of a small ravine, maybe 30 feet deep. At the bottom, I could make out a figure sprawled motionless on the rocky ground. My breath caught in my throat as I carefully made my way down the steep slope, loose stones skittering away under my boots. As I approached, the details became clearer, and my stomach churned. It was a man, probably in his mid-30s, his clothes torn and saturated with blood. I knelt beside him, fingers pressed to his neck, searching for a pulse I already knew I wouldn't find. His skin was cool to the touch, eyes staring sightlessly at the canopy above. The wounds covering his body made me recoil. Deep gashes ran across his chest and arms, the edges ragged and uneven. This was no fall. The injuries were vicious, brutal, but not like any animal attack I'd ever seen. The cuts were too precise, almost methodical in their placement. A twig snapped somewhere above me, the sound like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. I spun around, hand instinctively going to the knife at my belt. Across the ravine, something moved between the trees, a flash of movement too quick to follow. It was large, that much I could tell, but its gait was wrong. Not the lumbering of a bear or the lithe movements of a mountain lion. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain in the vastness of the forest. "This is Park Ranger Thorne. Is someone there?" No response came, just the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I fumbled for my radio again, eyes never leaving the spot where I'd seen the movement. "Dispatch, this is Thorne. I've found a victim at the bottom of a ravine, approximately half a mile north of the backpack site. Adult male, multiple lacerations, no vital signs." I swallowed hard before continuing. "The wounds are unusual, not consistent with any wildlife in the area, and I've got movement up here. Something big." "Understood, Nolan," came the reply, tinged with concern. "Backup is 10 minutes out. Get to high ground and stay put. Do not engage." I knew I should listen. Every instinct, every bit of training told me to climb out of this ravine and wait for help. But curiosity and a sense of duty pushed me forward. If there was something dangerous out here, something that had done this to a man, it needed to be found, contained, before it could hurt anyone else. With a final glance at the victim, I began to make my way up the opposite side of the ravine, towards where I'd seen the movement. The forest grew denser, the canopy overhead knitting together to block out most of the sunlight. Shadows deepened, and sounds became muffled. Ahead, barely visible through the undergrowth, I spotted the dark maw of a cave entrance. Tracks led inside, large clawed prints unlike anything I'd ever seen before. They were fresh, the disturbed soil still damp. I hesitated at the threshold, every fiber of my being screaming at me to turn back. But the thought of that man in the ravine, of the terror in those screams I'd heard, steeled my resolve. I drew my knife, a meager defense, but better than nothing, clicked on my flashlight, and stepped into the darkness. The beam of light cut through the gloom, revealing a shallow cave, its walls slick with moisture and covered in a thick layer of moss. The air was heavy, filled with a stench that made my eyes water. The cloying sweetness of decay mingled with something else, something acrid and alien. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw them. Bones, scattered across the cave floor in careless piles. Some were clearly animal, deer, maybe a bear, but others, my throat constricted as I recognized the unmistakable curve of a human skull, bits of flesh still clinging to yellowed bone. Among the older remains lay a more recent victim. A woman, her face frozen in a rictus of terror, limbs contorted at unnatural angles. She couldn't have been dead for more than a day or two. Before I could process the horror of the scene, a low hiss echoed from the depths of the cave. I swung my flashlight towards the sound, and in that moment, I saw it. Emerging from the shadows was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen or imagined. It resembled a massive wolverine but stood upright on powerful hind legs, easily 7 feet tall. Its fur was patchy, revealing sinewy muscles and mottled gray skin beneath. Long, wickedly curved claws extended from its hands, dripping with some viscous fluid. But it was the eyes that struck me most. Intelligent, calculating, and filled with an otherworldly hunger. I stumbled backward, my back pressing against the damp cave wall. The creature watched me, its head tilted in an almost quizzical manner, as if studying my reaction. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, without warning, it lunged. I dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as its claws barely missed me. Pain exploded in my arm where one talon had grazed the skin. The creature's momentum carried it past me, giving me a precious second to scramble towards the cave entrance. Bursting into the open forest, I ran. Behind me, I heard the creature's enraged shriek, a sound that sent icy tendrils of fear down my spine. I weaved through the trees, ducking under low-hanging branches and vaulting over fallen logs. The thing pursued, its movements unnaturally fast and agile for its size. My lungs burned, legs heavy with exhaustion, but terror kept me moving. I spotted a massive fallen oak ahead, its trunk creating a natural barrier. With the last reserves of my strength, I vaulted over it, hoping to buy myself some time. The sound of splintering wood filled the air as the creature tore through the obstacle as if it were made of twigs. Desperation clouding my judgment, I fumbled for my radio. "Back up," I gasped into the receiver. "I need immediate assistance. Unknown creature, extremely aggressive, pursuing me north of the ravine." "We're 2 minutes out, Nolan," came the staticky reply. "Hang tight." 2 minutes. It might as well have been 2 hours. The trees began to thin, and with horror, I realized I was approaching the edge of a cliff overlooking the churning waters of the Blackwater River far below. Trapped between the monster and a 100-foot drop, I turned to face my pursuer. The creature approached slowly now, almost lazily, as if savoring the moment. Its eyes gleamed with a predatory intelligence that chilled me to my core. I glanced around frantically for anything I could use as a weapon. My hand closed around a loose stone, hefting its weight. "Come on!" I shouted, more to psych myself up than anything else. The creature snarled, lips peeling back to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. It charged. At the last second, I sidestepped, swinging the stone with all my might. It connected with a sickening thud, and the creature stumbled, momentarily stunned. But my victory was short-lived. Before I could press my advantage, it recovered, slashing out with those deadly claws. White-hot pain exploded across my leg as they connected, and I fell hard onto my back. The creature loomed over me, ready to deliver the killing blow. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end. A gunshot rang out, the sound echoing across the cliffside. My eyes flew open to see the creature recoiling, dark blood oozing from a wound in its shoulder. I looked over to see Deputy Hayes, his rifle aimed steadily at the monster. He was flanked by 2 other officers, their weapons trained on the beast. "Get down!" Hayes shouted. I rolled to the side as they opened fire in unison. The creature shrieked, a sound of pain and fury that seemed to shake the very air. It staggered under the barrage, inching closer to the cliff's edge. With a final piercing glare in my direction, it turned and leaped. We rushed to the edge, watching in disbelief as it plummeted into the churning river below, disappearing beneath the white-capped surface. Hayes helped me to my feet, his face pale with shock. "You all right, Thorne?" I grimaced, clutching my bleeding leg. "I've been better. What the hell was that thing?" He shook his head, eyes still fixed on the river below. "I don't know. But I've got a feeling this isn't over." As the adrenaline began to fade, the full weight of what had happened crashed over me. The bodies in the cave, the horrific wounds, the impossible creature, it all seemed like a nightmare. But the pain in my leg and the haunted looks on my colleagues' faces told me it was all too real. The forest, once a place of peace and refuge, now held an undercurrent of menace. As we made our way back to the ranger station, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had stumbled upon something ancient and terrible, something that had been waiting in the shadows all along, watching and hungry. And somewhere out there, in the depths of the Monongahela National Forest, I knew it was still alive, biding its time until it could strike again. The days following the incident passed in a blur of debriefings, medical examinations, and sleepless nights. I sat in the sterile confines of the ranger station's small infirmary, wincing as the doctor cleaned and stitched the gashes on my leg. "You're lucky," Dr. Reeves muttered, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Whatever did this just missed your femoral artery. A couple inches to the left, and we'd be having a very different conversation." I nodded absently, my mind still replaying the events in the forest. The creature's eyes, intelligent and filled with malice, haunted my thoughts. "Any idea what could have caused these wounds?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Dr. Reeves sighed, setting aside her suture kit. "Officially, I'm putting it down as a bear attack. Unofficially," she met my gaze, her expression troubled. "I've never seen lacerations quite like these, too precise for a bear, too large for a mountain lion. And the spacing," she shook her head, "it doesn't match any predator native to these parts." Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. Deputy Hayes entered, looking as haggard as I felt. "How you holding up, Thorne?" "I'll live," I replied, attempting a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Any news?" Hayes ran a hand through his thinning hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as a sign of frustration. "We've got search teams combing the river and surrounding areas. No sign of whatever that thing was. But we did find the cave." My stomach clenched at the memory. "And it's bad, Nolan. Forensics team identified at least 7 victims, maybe more. Some of the remains are years old. We're dealing with a serial killer here. I shook my head vehemently. That was no human, Hayes. You saw it yourself. I saw something I can't explain, he admitted. But let's be realistic here. There's no such thing as monsters. Dr. Reeves cleared her throat. I hate to interrupt, but Nolan needs rest. You can continue this discussion tomorrow. Hayes nodded, turning to leave. At the door he paused. Get some sleep, Thorne. We've got a long few days ahead of us. As the door closed behind him, I leaned back on the examination table, closing my eyes. But sleep, when it came, was filled with nightmares of dark caves and glinting claws. A week passed, and life in the small community near the national forest took on an air of nervous tension. Hiking trails were closed, campgrounds evacuated. The official story, a rogue bear responsible for a series of attacks, did little to quell the unease that seemed to permeate the town. I found myself on mandatory leave, my wounded leg and the traumatic nature of the incident keeping me off active duty. But inactivity only made the memories more vivid, the questions more pressing. Late one evening, a knock at my cabin door startled me from a fitful doze. I opened it cautiously to find an elderly man standing on my porch, his weathered face creased with concern. Ranger Thorne, he asked, his voice gravelly with age. I nodded, studying him warily. Can I help you? He glanced over his shoulder, as if checking to see if he'd been followed. I heard you've encountered something unusual in the forest. May I come in? There are things you need to know. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside, allowing him to enter. He settled into a chair at my small kitchen table, his gnarled hands clasped before him. My name is Joseph Redfeather, he began. My people have lived in these mountains for countless generations. We know its secrets, its hidden places, and its dangers. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. What kind of dangers? Redfeather's dark eyes met mine, filled with an intensity that made me shiver. The creature you faced is known to us as a Wendigo, an ancient evil born of dark desires and insatiable hunger. A Wendigo? I repeated skeptically. That's just an old legend. He shook his head sadly. All legends have their roots in truth, Ranger Thorne. The Wendigo is very real and very dangerous. It was once human, transformed by greed and malice into something monstrous. I thought back to the intelligence I'd seen in the creature's eyes, the almost human way it had studied me before attacking. Why did it come after me? You disrupted its lair, took what it considered its own, Redfeather explained. The bodies you found were its trophies. By interfering, you became its new target. A chill ran down my spine. Is it gone? The old man sighed heavily. For now, perhaps, but such evils have a way of returning. You must be vigilant, Ranger Thorne, and remember, not all that is lost should be found. As he stood to leave, I called after him. Wait, why are you telling me all this? Redfeather paused at the door, a faint, sad smile on his lips. Consider it a warning and a gift. Knowledge is power, especially against the darkness that lurks in these woods. Long after he had gone, I sat at my table, mind reeling. Part of me wanted to dismiss his words as the ramblings of a superstitious old man, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had veered into territory I was ill-equipped to navigate. Weeks passed without incident. The forest, once a source of comfort, now felt alien and threatening. But as the days grew shorter and autumn painted the trees in vibrant hues, a semblance of normalcy began to return to the park. I was cleared for duty. My physical wounds healed even as the mental scars remained. My first day back on patrol, I found myself approaching the area where I'd first heard those terrible screams. The forest was quiet, peaceful even, belieing the horrors it had witnessed. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I came across a group of campers setting up in a restricted area. My ranger instincts kicked in, momentarily overriding my unease. Afternoon, folks, I called out, forcing a smile. I'm afraid this area is off limits for camping. A woman with short red hair stepped forward, looking chagrined. Oh, we didn't see any signs. Sorry about that, Ranger. Thorne, I supplied. No worries. There's a designated site about 2 miles east of here. Much better views of the valley, too. As the group began to pack up their gear, a bearded man in his 30s approached me, his expression curious. Say, Ranger Thorne, you ever see anything strange out here? I felt my smile falter. Strange how? He grinned, oblivious to my discomfort. Well, we heard some stories in town about some kind of creature the locals are calling the Shadow Beast. Thought it might make for some good campfire tales, you know. I forced a chuckle, hoping it sounded more natural than it felt. Sounds like someone's been telling tall tales. Trust me, the forest has plenty to offer without imaginary monsters. The campers soon headed off towards the designated site, their laughter echoing through the trees. I continued my patrol, the encounter leaving me unsettled. The shadow beast, was that what people were calling it now? How long before rumor and speculation drew thrill seekers and monster hunters to the park? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, I made my way back to the ranger station. The comforting lights of the building came into view, and with them a figure waiting on the porch. Deputy Hayes straightened as I approached, a brown paper bag in his hand. "Thought you could use this after your first day back," he said, holding out the bag. The rich aroma of coffee and something sweet wafted from within. "Thanks," I said, genuinely grateful. "How's the investigation going?" Hayes sighed, leaning against the railing. "Officially? Closed. No evidence, no leads. The higher-ups are calling it an isolated incident, probably a bear that's long gone by now." I opened my mouth to protest, but he held up a hand. "I know, Nolan, I was there too. But what are we supposed to tell people? That there's some kind of monster lurking in the woods? We'd cause a panic." I nodded reluctantly, understanding the logic even as it chafed against my sense of duty. "So we just, what? Pretend it never happened?" "We stay vigilant," Hayes said firmly. "Keep our eyes open, protect the people who come here, and hope to God we never see anything like that again." As night settled over the forest, I sat on the porch of the station, nursing a cup of coffee and lost in thought. The events of the past weeks lingered at the edges of my mind, a constant, nagging presence. But for the first time in a while, I felt a sense of purpose returning. Maybe Hayes was right. We couldn't change what had happened, couldn't explain it in any way that made sense. But we could be prepared, watchful, and if the forest had more mysteries or horrors in store, well, I'd be here, ready to face them. The coffee warmed my hands as a cool breeze rustled through the trees. In the distance, an owl hooted, a reminder that life in the forest went on, oblivious to the concerns of humans. I took a deep breath, letting the familiar sense of pine and earth fill my lungs. Whatever was out there, whatever secrets the Monongahela held, this was still my home, and I'd do whatever it took to protect it. As autumn deepened into winter, a heavy blanket of snow transformed the forest into a silent white wonderland. The quiet beauty of the landscape almost made it possible to forget the horrors of that fateful day. Almost. I threw myself into my work, patrolling even the most remote trails, always watchful for any sign of the creature's return. But as weeks turned to months with no incidents, I began to wonder if perhaps it had all been some terrible hallucination, a product of stress and an overactive imagination. It was on one of these patrols, on a crisp December morning, that I stumbled upon something that shattered my fragile peace of mind. I had ventured far off the main trails, following the meandering path of a half-frozen stream. The snow crunched beneath my boots, the only sound in the hushed forest. As I rounded a bend, I froze, my breath catching in my throat. There, etched deep into the bark of an ancient oak, was a symbol, a twisted, inhuman figure that seemed to writhe even in its static form. It was crude but unmistakable, and terrifyingly familiar. I had seen the same mark in the cave where I had first encountered the creature. With trembling fingers, I reached out to touch the carving. The cuts were old, the edges smoothed by time and weather. This was no recent vandalism, but something that had been here for years, perhaps decades. As I examined the tree more closely, I noticed other, fainter markings. Words in a language I didn't recognize, symbols that made my eyes hurt to look at directly. And there, barely visible beneath a layer of lichen, a date, 1891. My mind reeled. If this marking was as old as it appeared, it meant that whatever we had encountered in the forest was not some new threat, but something that had been here for generations. How many other incidents had there been over the years, covered up or dismissed as animal attacks or tragic accidents? I fumbled for my camera, snapping pictures of the tree and its unsettling decorations. As I did so, a sound carried on the wind made me freeze, a long, low howl that was neither wolf nor coyote. It echoed through the trees, setting my nerves on edge. Without conscious thought, I found myself running, slipping and sliding through the snow as I made my way back to more familiar terrain. Only when the ranger station came into view did I slow, my lungs burning from the cold air. Inside, I slumped into my chair, staring at the images on my camera's display. What did it all mean? And more importantly, what was I supposed to do with this information? I thought back to Joseph Redfeather's words, "Not all that is lost should be found." But now that I had found this, could I simply ignore it? As darkness fell, I made a decision. I wouldn't report this officially, not yet, but I needed to know more. If this threat had been here for over a century, there had to be records, stories, something that could help me understand what we were dealing with. Tomorrow I would begin my search. For now, I stared out the window at the moonlit forest, wondering what other secrets lay hidden beneath the snowy blanket of winter. The county library was a small, unassuming building that smelled of old paper and dust. I had taken a rare day off, ostensibly to run errands in town. In reality, I was here to dig into the area's history, searching for any clues that might shed light on the markings I had found. The librarian, a kindly older woman named Mrs. Patel, seemed thrilled to have someone interested in local history. She led me to a back room filled with archives and county records, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "Not many people come in looking for this stuff," she said, pulling out several heavy, leather-bound volumes. "What exactly are you researching, Ranger Thorne?" I hesitated, not wanting to reveal too much. "Just unexplained incidents in the park. Animal attacks, missing hikers, that sort of thing." Mrs. Patel's smile faded slightly. "Oh my. Well, I'm afraid you'll find plenty of that. These mountains have their share of tragedies." For hours, I pored over old newspapers, county records, and handwritten accounts from early settlers. Most of it was mundane, reports of harsh winters, crop yields, the occasional bear sighting. But as I dug deeper, a pattern began to emerge. Every few decades there would be a rash of disappearances or unusual animal attacks. The reports were often vague, with phrases like partially consumed remains and unexplained markings that made my skin crawl. And always, these incidents seemed to cluster around particularly harsh winters or times of scarcity. One account, from a trapper in 1943, caught my attention. "Found Joe's cabin yesterday. Door torn clean off its hinges. Inside was, I ain't got words for it. Like something had been playing with what was left of him. Saw tracks in the snow leading away, bigger than any bear, walking on two legs. I'm getting out of these mountains. Some things ain't meant to be hunted." I was so engrossed in my reading that I didn't notice Mrs. Patel approaching until she spoke, making me jump. "Find anything interesting?" she asked, peering at the papers spread before me. I nodded, trying to calm my racing heart. "It's fascinating stuff. Hey, do you know if there are any local historians or folklorists I could talk to? Someone who might know more about the area's legends?" Mrs. Patel thought for a moment. "Well, there's old Dr. Harrison, retired now, but he used to teach anthropology over at the community college. Bit of an eccentric, but he knows more about local lore than anyone else around here." I jotted down the address she gave me, thanking her for her help. As I gathered my notes to leave, a newspaper clipping from 1972 caught my eye. The headline read, "Park Ranger Missing, Presumed Dead After Animal Attack." Below was a photo of a man in a ranger uniform, his face eerily similar to my own. The name beneath the picture made my blood run cold. Thomas Thorne. With shaking hands, I showed the clipping to Mrs. Patel. "This man, was he?" She squinted at the image, then looked at me with surprise. "Why, that must be your grandfather. I remember when this happened. Such a tragedy. They never did find his body." I stumbled out of the library, my mind reeling. My grandfather had been a ranger here, and he had encountered, what? The same creature that had nearly killed me? Why had my family never spoken of this? As I drove towards Dr. Harrison's house, the pieces of a larger puzzle began to fall into place. But with each answer came a dozen new questions. Whatever was happening in these mountains, it was clear that my connection to it ran deeper than I had ever imagined. Dr. Harrison's house was a cluttered Victorian at the edge of town, its paint peeling and yard overgrown. As I approached the front door, I could hear the faint strains of classical music drifting from within. My knock was answered by a man who looked every bit the eccentric academic. Wild white hair, thick glasses, and a cardigan that had seen better days. "Yes?" he asked, peering at me suspiciously. "Dr. Harrison? I'm Ranger Nolan Thorne. I was hoping to talk to you about some local history." His eyes lit up with interest. "Ah, a fellow seeker of knowledge. Come in, come in." The interior of the house was as chaotic as its owner, every surface covered with books, papers, and curious artifacts. Dr. Harrison led me to a cluttered study, clearing a stack of papers from a chair for me to sit. "Now then," he said, settling into a worn leather armchair, "what aspect of our fair region's history interests you?" I hesitated, unsure how to broach the subject. Finally, I decided on directness. "I'm interested in local legends, specifically those related to unexplained creatures in the forest." Harrison's bushy eyebrows shot up. "Ah," he said softly. You've seen it, haven't you? My surprise must have shown on my face because he chuckled. Don't look so shocked, young man. You're not the first to come asking about our resident monster, though it's been some years. For the next hour, I listened as Harrison spun a tale that both chilled my blood and confirmed my worst fears. The creature, which he too called a Wendigo, had been a part of local lore for centuries. The native tribes knew of it, he explained. They had rituals, wards to keep it at bay, but when the settlers came, they brought with them a new kind of hunger. For land, for resources, for power. According to Harrison, the Wendigo was drawn to that hunger, feeding on it and growing stronger. It's a parasite of sorts, he mused, corrupting those with the greatest appetites, turning them into something other. I thought of the intelligence I'd seen in the creature's eyes, the almost human way it had studied me. So it was human once? Harrison nodded gravely. And in some twisted way, perhaps it still is. That's what makes it so dangerous. It thinks, it plans, and it remembers those who wrong it. A chill ran down my spine as I recalled Joseph Redfeather's warning. I found some markings in the forest, I said, pulling out my phone to show him the photos. Do you know what they mean? The old professor's face paled as he examined the images. Where did you find these? He demanded. I described the location, and Harrison's expression grew even more troubled. That area has been a focal point for incidents for generations. Your grandfather, you knew him? I interrupted, surprised. Harrison nodded sadly. Thomas was a good man, too curious for his own good, much like yourself. He was getting close to the truth when he disappeared. What truth? I pressed. The old man sighed heavily. That the Wendigo isn't just some mindless beast. It's tied to this land, to the very essence of the forest. And there are those who would use its power for their own ends. He stood abruptly, moving to a locked cabinet in the corner of the room. From it he retrieved a small, leather-bound journal. This was your grandfather's, he said, holding it out to me. He left it with me for safekeeping, in case something happened to him. I took the journal with trembling hands. Why are you telling me all this? Harrison's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. Because knowledge is power, Ranger Thorne. And you're going to need all the power you can get if you're to face what's coming. As I left Harrison's house, my head spinning with revelations, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped onto a path from which there was no return. Winter deepened, blanketing the forest in silence and snow. I threw myself into my work, patrolling even the most remote trails with renewed vigilance. But always, in the back of my mind, the weight of my grandfather's journal and the knowledge Dr. Harrison had shared pressed down on me. I read the journal in bits and pieces, often late at night when sleep eluded me. My grandfather's neat handwriting filled page after page with observations, theories, and increasingly disturbing encounters. He had been tracking the Wendigo's movements, trying to understand its nature and purpose. The final entry, dated just days before his disappearance, was particularly chilling. I'm close to understanding, but I fear the knowledge may come at too high a price. The markings, the symbols, they're not just territorial signs, they're a language, a means of communication. But who is the Wendigo talking to? And more importantly, who is answering? One bitterly cold morning in late January, I received a call from dispatch. A group of hikers had failed to return from an overnight trip. As I geared up for the search, a sense of foreboding settled over me. The trail the hikers had taken led deep into the heart of the forest, near the area where I had first encountered the Wendigo. As I snowshoed through the silent woods, every snapping twig and shifting shadow set my nerves on edge. I was nearing the last known location of the hikers when I saw it. A flash of color against the white snow. Drawing closer, my heart sank. It was a torn piece of fabric from a high-end hiking jacket, stained dark with what I knew instinctively was blood. As I surveyed the area, the signs of a struggle became clear. The snow was churned up, trees scraped and broken, and there, carved fresh into the trunk of a massive pine, was a symbol I recognized from my grandfather's journal. A crack of a branch behind me made me spin around, hand flying to my sidearm. But instead of the monster I half expected, I found myself face to face with Joseph Redfeather. "You shouldn't be here alone, Ranger Thorne," he said, his weathered face grave. "I'm doing my job," I replied, trying to calm my racing heart. "There are missing hikers." Redfeather shook his head sadly. "They're beyond our help now. But you still have a choice." "What do you mean?" The old man's dark eyes met mine. "A storm is coming, Nolan, one that has been brewing for generations. The hunger is growing stronger, and the barriers that have held it in check are weakening." I thought of the symbols, the strange markings that seemed to be appearing more frequently. "What can we do?" "We prepare," Redfeather said firmly. We gather allies, those who remember the old ways, and we hope that when the time comes, it will be enough. As if in response to his words, a howl echoed through the forest, a sound of hunger and rage that seemed to shake the very air around us. Redfeather and I exchanged a look of grim understanding. The peace of the past months had been an illusion. Whatever had been set in motion that day in the cave was far from over. It was, I realized with a mixture of fear and determination, only the beginning. As we made our way back to the ranger station, I felt the weight of responsibility settling onto my shoulders. My grandfather had given his life trying to uncover the truth. Now, it fell to me to finish what he had started. The forest, once a place of solace and beauty, now loomed dark and forbidding. But it was still my home, still the land I had sworn to protect. Whatever trials lay ahead, whatever horrors lurked in the shadows, I would face them. For in the end, that's what being a ranger, what being a thorn, was all about. Standing as a bulwark between the darkness and the light, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. As the sun set behind the snow-capped mountains, casting long shadows across the land, I made a silent vow. I would uncover the truth, no matter the cost, and when the storm finally broke, I would be ready. I never thought I'd end up as a park ranger, especially not in one of the most remote corners of the country. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It was the summer of 1997, and I had just turned 35. My life in Seattle had imploded spectacularly. A failed marriage, a soul-crushing job at a tech company, and a growing sense that I was wasting my life staring at computer screens and attending pointless meetings. I needed an escape, and Olympic National Park seemed like the perfect place to hit the reset button. The irony wasn't lost on me. Trading the concrete jungle for an actual one? It sounded like the plot of a bad movie. But as I drove my beat-up Ford through the winding roads leading to the park, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The towering trees and misty mountains promised solitude and a chance to reconnect with something real. My first day at the ranger station was a blur of introductions and orientations. My new colleagues were a mixed bunch, some fresh-faced kids straight out of college, and others who looked like they'd been born in the forest. One of them, an old-timer named Hank, caught my attention. He had a weathered face that spoke of decades in the wilderness and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. "Welcome to Olympic, city boy," Hank said with a wry smile. "Hope you're ready for some real adventure." I laughed it off, thinking he was just pulling my leg. Little did I know how prophetic those words would turn out to be. As the weeks passed, I settled into my new routine. The work was physical but satisfying. I spent my days maintaining trails, assisting lost hikers, and occasionally dealing with the local wildlife. The quiet of the forest was a balm to my frayed nerves, and I found myself sleeping better than I had in years. But there was something about the park that nagged at me. Sometimes, when I was deep in the backcountry, I'd feel a prickle on the back of my neck, as if someone or something was watching me. I'd turn around, half expecting to see a curious deer or maybe a bear, but there was never anything there. Just the endless green of the forest and the distant cry of an eagle. It was during one of these moments, about 2 months into my new job, that Hank found me staring into the trees, my hand unconsciously reaching for the radio at my belt. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked, his voice low. I turned to him, surprised. "Feel what?" Hank's eyes scanned the forest before settling back on me. "This place, it's got secrets, old secrets. The kind that don't like being disturbed." I chuckled nervously, trying to shake off the chill that had settled in my bones. "Come on, Hank. Don't tell me you believe in ghost stories." His face remained serious. "There are things in these woods that defy explanation, kid. Things that have been here long before us and will be here long after we're gone. Just keep your wits about you, especially in the deep forest." With that cryptic warning, he trudged off down the trail, leaving me to wonder what exactly I had gotten myself into. Little did I know that in just a few short weeks, I'd be face to face with one of those secrets, fighting for my life in the very wilderness I had thought would be my sanctuary. The days grew shorter as summer faded into fall. The tourists thinned out, leaving the park to those of us who called it home and the hardier campers who didn't mind a bit of chill in the air. I had grown to love the rhythm of life here, the early mornings filled with birdsong, the long hikes through terrain that never ceased to amaze me, and the quiet evenings spent around the campfire with my fellow rangers. But Hank's warning lingered in the back of my mind. I found myself paying closer attention to the stories shared around those campfires. Tales of hikers gone missing, of strange sounds in the night that couldn't be attributed to any known animal. of ancient Native American legends about spirits that guarded the deepest parts of the forest. I tried to rationalize it all. Every wilderness area had its share of mysteries and local legends. It was probably just the isolation playing tricks on people's minds, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. One crisp October morning, I was assigned to check on a family that had failed to return from a camping trip. It wasn't an uncommon occurrence. People often underestimated the vastness of the park or the challenges of the terrain. Usually it ended with a simple rescue, maybe a sprained ankle or a case of getting turned around on the trails. As I loaded up my Jeep with supplies, Hank approached, his face grave. "Where you headed?" he asked, though I suspected he already knew. "Ho River Trail," I replied. "Family of 4, 2 days overdue." Hank's face tightened. "That's deep country. Be careful out there." I nodded, trying to hide my unease. "Always am. It's probably just another case of city folks biting off more than they can chew." "Maybe," Hank said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. He hesitated for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. "Take this with you." He pressed a smooth stone into my hand. It was dark green, almost black, with strange symbols etched into its surface. "What is it?" I asked, turning it over in my palm. "Protection," Hank replied cryptically. "Found it years ago on a trail that doesn't exist anymore. Just keep it with you, okay?" I wanted to laugh it off, to tell him he was being superstitious, but the seriousness in his eyes stopped me. I pocketed the stone, thanked him, and climbed into the Jeep. As I drove towards the trailhead, the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees loomed larger, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. The usual sounds of the forest, birdsong, the rustle of small animals, seemed muted, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. I tried to shake off the growing sense of unease. I was here to do a job, to find a lost family and bring them home safely. Whatever legends or superstitions existed about this part of the park, they were just that, stories. But as I parked at the trailhead and shouldered my pack, I couldn't help but feel like I was stepping into something far beyond my understanding. The stone in my pocket seemed to grow heavier, a tangible reminder of Hank's warning. With a deep breath, I set off down the trail, unaware that each step was taking me closer to a nightmare that would change my life forever. The Ho River Trail was notorious for its beauty and its challenges. As I hiked deeper into the forest, the world around me transformed. The trees grew impossibly tall, their trunks covered in a thick layer of moss that muffled my footsteps. Shafts of sunlight pierced through the canopy, creating an otherworldly glow that danced across the forest floor. Under different circumstances, I might have found it breathtaking. But today every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every unexpected sound made me flinch. I tried to focus on the task at hand, looking for any sign of the missing family, broken branches, discarded gear, anything out of place. As I pushed further along the trail, I noticed something odd. The trail markers, which were supposed to guide hikers, were either missing or damaged. It was as if someone or something had deliberately tried to make the path harder to follow. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered Hank's stories about trails that disappeared. I checked my map and compass, reassuring myself that I knew where I was. But doubt began to creep in. The forest seemed different somehow, older and more primeval than I remembered from previous trips. The air felt thicker, almost oppressive, and that metallic smell I'd noticed before grew stronger. After what felt like hours of hiking, I finally reached the area where the family's campsite was supposed to be. What I found made my blood run cold. The site was a mess, the tent half collapsed and belongings scattered as if someone had left in a hurry. But it was the eerie silence that got to me the most. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of the wind in the trees. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I called out, my voice sounding absurdly loud in the stillness. "Hello, park ranger, is anyone here?" No response, just that oppressive silence. As I investigated the campsite, my unease grew. The family's food had been torn open, but not in a way that suggested animal interference. The cuts were too clean, too deliberate, and then there was that smell, stronger now. A sickly sweet odor that made my stomach churn. I radioed back to base, reporting my findings and requesting backup. The response was garbled, full of static, but I managed to make out that help would be on the way. I just had to hold tight and continue my search. That's when I heard Nala's rustling in the underbrush, too deliberate to be the wind. I froze, my hand instinctively going to the knife at my belt. I called out again, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is the park ranger. If someone's there, please show yourself." The rustling stopped abruptly. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Just a flash, really, something darting between the trees about 50 yards away. It was fast, impossibly fast, and moved in a way that was decidedly not human. My heart pounding, I moved towards the spot where I'd seen the movement. The underbrush was thick here, and I had to push my way through, acutely aware of how vulnerable I was. That's when I stumbled upon the bone pile, small bones, probably from birds and rodents, stacked in a crude, almost ritualistic manner. They were fresh, some still with scraps of flesh clinging to them. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. No animal I knew of displayed this kind of behavior. The rustling came again, closer this time, much closer. I turned slowly, my knife now drawn, though I knew it would be of little use against whatever was out there. And then I saw it. Standing just 10 feet away, half hidden by a gnarled old tree, was a creature that defied description. Tall and gaunt, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its skin was a mottled gray-green, rough and leathery like tree bark. But it was the face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come, elongated like a wolf's muzzle, but with eyes that were disturbingly intelligent and undeniably malevolent. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, we stared at each other. I felt like a rabbit caught in the gaze of a wolf, my survival instincts screaming at me to run while my body remained frozen in terror. Then, with a sound that was part shriek and part growl, the creature lunged towards me. And finally, mercifully, my body responded. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, my only thought to put as much distance between myself and that abomination as possible. As I fled, I could hear it behind me, moving through the forest with an ease that no human could match. It wasn't running full out, I realized with growing horror. It was toying with me, enjoying the chase. I had no idea where I was going. The trail was long forgotten, and in my panic, I'd lost all sense of direction. All I knew was that I had to keep moving, had to find a way out of this nightmare. Suddenly, the trees opened up into a small clearing, and I skidded to a halt, nearly falling. What I saw there would be seared into my memory forever. The missing family lay scattered across the ground, their bodies twisted in ways that human bodies should never be. The blood, there was so much blood, dried and dark against the forest floor. They had been dead for days, despite having been reported missing only recently. I stood there frozen in horror, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. That's when I felt it, a presence behind me, the hot, fetid breath of the creature on the back of my neck. I closed my eyes, certain that my death was imminent. But then a sound cut through the air, a gunshot, loud and sharp in the unnatural quiet of the forest. The creature shrieked, a sound so piercing it felt like my eardrums might burst. I turned just in time to see it disappear into the trees, moving faster than my eyes could follow. Standing at the edge of the clearing, shotgun in hand, and a look of grim determination on his face, was Hank. "You okay, kid?" he asked, his voice shaky but firm. I nodded, though I was far from okay. My world had just been turned upside down, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. As the sound of approaching vehicles reached us, the backup finally arriving, Hank put a hand on my shoulder. "What you've seen here," he said quietly, "it ain't something the world is ready for, you understand?" I did. Even as the clearing filled with other rangers and eventually law enforcement, I knew that the truth of what happened here would never see the light of day. How could it? Who would believe us? The official report would cite a wild animal attack, probably a bear or mountain lion. The strange circumstances, the unnatural speed of decay, the bone pile, all of it would be ignored or explained away. As I watched my colleagues go about their grim work, cataloging the scene and preparing to remove the bodies, I felt a weight settle onto my shoulders. I had come to Olympic National Park seeking peace and a fresh start. Instead, I had stumbled into a world of ancient secrets and primal terrors, a world I could never fully leave behind. The stone Hank had given me seemed to burn in my pocket, a reminder that some truths are better left buried in the deep, dark woods. The days following the incident passed in a blur. I gave my statement to the authorities, carefully omitting any mention of the creature I'd seen. Hank had made it clear that such details would only complicate matters, and deep down I knew he was right. Who would believe me anyway? The official report cited a tragic animal attack, likely a bear driven to aggression by the encroachment of humans into its territory. It was a neat, tidy explanation that everyone seemed eager to accept. Everyone except me. I couldn't shake the memory of what I'd seen, the unnatural way the creature moved, the intelligence in its eyes, the deliberate arrangement of bones. None of it fit with any animal behavior I'd ever encountered. And then there was the question of time. The family had only been reported missing for a couple of days. but the state of their bodies suggested they'd been dead much longer. As I tried to make sense of it all, I found myself drawn to Hank. He seemed to be the only one who understood what had really happened out there. "How long have you known?" I asked him one evening as we sat on the porch of his cabin, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Hank took a long drag from his cigarette before answering. "Known? Hell, kid, I'm not sure anyone really knows. But I've suspected for years. This park, it's got a history that goes back way before any of us were here. The local tribes, they knew about it. Had legends, warnings about parts of the forest where even their bravest warriors wouldn't go." He paused, his eyes scanning the tree line as if expecting to see something emerge from the growing shadows. "What we saw out there, it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's things in these woods that defy explanation. Things that have been here for centuries, maybe longer." I shuddered, remembering the creature's otherworldly appearance. "But why haven't more people seen them? Why isn't this common knowledge?" Hank chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You think that family was the first to go missing out here? There's a reason some of those trails are barely marked, why we warn people to stick to the designated camping areas. Most of the time, whatever's out there is content to stay hidden. But every now and then," he trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air between us. I fingered the stone he'd given me, which I'd taken to carrying everywhere. "And this? What's its story?" Hank's eyes narrowed as he looked at the stone. "Found that years ago, on a trail that don't exist no more. It's got power, that much I know. Kept me safe more than once when things got weird out in the deep forest." I wanted to scoff, to dismiss it as superstition. But after what I'd seen, I wasn't in a position to dismiss anything. As the days turned into weeks, I tried to return to some semblance of normalcy. I went about my duties, led hikes, and helped maintain the trails. But everything felt different now. Every shadow in the forest seemed to hide potential dangers. As autumn deepened into winter, the park transformed. Snow blanketed the landscape, muffling sounds and creating an eerie stillness. Tourist numbers dwindled to almost nothing, leaving us rangers to maintain the vast wilderness. But for me, the peace of winter brought no comfort. Sleep became my enemy. Every night I'd jolt awake, drenched in sweat, the creature's face vivid in my mind. During the day, I'd catch myself staring into the woods, searching for movement that didn't belong. My colleagues noticed the change in me. Some attributed it to the trauma of finding the family's bodies. If only they knew the whole truth. One particularly cold morning in December, I was assigned to check on our remote weather stations. As I snowshoed through the silent forest, that familiar prickle of unease crept up my spine. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the crunch of snow beneath my feet and the stark beauty of the winter landscape. I reached the first station without incident, but as I approached the second, deep in the backcountry, something felt off. The station itself appeared untouched, but surrounding it were tracks I couldn't identify. They were too large for any animal native to the area, and the pattern was all wrong, as if whatever made them walked on two legs, but with an unnatural gait. My heart raced as I radioed back to base, trying to keep my voice steady as I reported the strange tracks. The response was garbled, full of static, but I made out instructions to document what I could and return immediately. As I knelt to photograph the tracks, a twig snapped in the forest behind me. I whirled around, my hand instinctively going to the knife at my belt. There, just visible through the trees, was a dark shape, tall, unnaturally still, watching me. For a moment I was paralyzed with fear. Then, remembering Hank's stone, I gripped it tightly in my pocket and slowly backed away. The shape didn't move, but I could feel its gaze following me. As soon as I was out of sight, I turned and ran, my snowshoes kicking up plumes of powder as I fled back towards base. I made it back safely, but the encounter shook me to my core. When I developed the photos of the tracks, they came out blurry and indistinct, as if something had interfered with the camera. My report was met with skepticism. The tracks were dismissed as likely belonging to a large elk or possibly a bear, despite my insistence that they were like nothing I'd ever seen before. As winter wore on, more strange occurrences piled up. Rangers reported equipment malfunctioning in certain areas of the park. Unexplained sounds echoed through the valleys at night. And always, there was that sense of being watched. I found myself spending more time with Hank, the only person who seemed to understand the true nature of what we were dealing with. Late one night, as we sat in his cabin nursing mugs of strong coffee, he finally opened up about his own experiences. "It was 78, he began, his voice low. "I was just a rookie, full of piss and vinegar. Thought I knew everything about these woods." He paused, taking a long sip of coffee. I was wrong, so damn wrong. Hank went on to describe an encounter eerily similar to mine, a routine patrol that turned into a nightmare. He'd seen not one but several creatures moving through the forest with inhuman speed and grace. They'd toyed with him for hours, herding him deeper into uncharted territory. I thought I was done for, Hank continued. Then I stumbled into this clearing. There was this, I don't know, altar I guess you'd call it, made of stones with symbols carved into them. The creatures wouldn't come near it. It's where I found that stone I gave you. I leaned forward, hanging on every word. What does it mean, Hank? What are these things? Hank shook his head. I don't know, kid. Not for sure. But I've done some digging over the years. There are legends, old stories from tribes that lived here long before us. They speak of guardians of the forest, ancient spirits that protected the land from intruders. But somewhere along the line, something changed. The guardians became corrupted, turned into something twisted and malevolent. But why haven't more people seen them? I asked. Why isn't this common knowledge? Think about it, Hank replied. How many people go missing in national parks every year? How many are never found? And those that do see something, well, who'd believe them? It's easier to blame it on animals, or exposure, or people getting lost. The truth is too big, too scary for most folks to handle. As Hank spoke, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. The implications were staggering. If what he was saying was true, then the creature I'd encountered was just the tip of the iceberg. There was an entire hidden world out there, existing alongside ours but largely unseen. So what do we do? I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. Hank's expression was grim. We keep watch. We protect who we can. And we hope to God that whatever's out there stays content with picking off the occasional lone hiker. As I left Hank's cabin that night, trudging through the snow back to my own quarters, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were sitting on a powder keg. How long before these creatures, whatever they were, decided that the occasional victim wasn't enough? And what could we, mere humans, do against forces that seemed to defy the laws of nature itself? Little did I know, events were already in motion that would force us to confront these questions head-on. The delicate balance between our world and theirs was about to be shattered, and I would find myself at the center of a conflict as old as the forest itself. As winter gave way to spring, an uneasy calm settled over the park. The strange occurrences seemed to have tapered off, and I began to wonder if perhaps the worst was behind us. But as the snow melted and the forest came back to life, so too did my sense of foreboding. It started with small things. Hikers reporting odd noises in the night. Wildlife behaving erratically. Nothing concrete, nothing we could point to as definitive proof of something amiss. But for those of us who knew what to look for, the signs were there. Then, in late April, everything changed. A group of college students on a camping trip went missing. This wasn't unusual in itself. We had search and rescue operations fairly regularly. But something about this felt different. The students had been well-prepared, experienced campers, and they'd vanished from an area of the park that was well-traveled and considered safe. I was part of the initial search team. As we combed through the area where the students were last seen, that familiar sense of wrongness crept over me. The forest was too quiet, the air thick with that metallic scent I'd come to associate with the creatures. We found the students' campsite on the second day of the search. It was a scene of chaos, tents shredded, belongings scattered. But it was the trees surrounding the campsite that made my blood run cold. They were marked with deep gouges, too high up to have been made by any normal animal, and arranged in patterns that seemed deliberate, almost like a language I couldn't understand. As I stood there staring at those markings, I felt a presence behind me. I turned to find Hank, his face grim. "This is it, isn't it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "They're not hiding anymore." Hank nodded slowly. "Looks that way. Question is, why now? What's changed?" Before I could respond, a shout went up from one of the other search team members. They'd found something, a trail leading away from the campsite, deeper into the forest. But it wasn't made by the students. The footprints were too large, too inhuman. Against my better judgment, I volunteered to follow the trail. Hank insisted on coming with me, and I was grateful for his presence. As we moved deeper into the forest, the world around us seemed to change. The trees grew denser, older. The light took on a greenish tinge, filtering through the canopy in strange patterns. We walked for what felt like hours, the trail becoming fainter but never quite disappearing. Then, suddenly, we emerged into a clearing unlike anything I'd ever seen before. At its center stood a massive stone structure, ancient and weathered. It resembled the altar Hank had described from his encounter years ago, but on a much larger scale. The stones were covered in the same strange symbols I'd seen carved into the trees, but it was what surrounded the structure that truly chilled me to the bone. Dozens of creatures, like the one I'd encountered months ago, moved around the clearing. They seemed to be in some sort of frenzy, circling the stone structure and emitting low, thrumming sounds that made my teeth ache. Hank and I crouched at the edge of the clearing, hidden by the underbrush. We watched in horrified fascination as the creatures continued their bizarre ritual. Among them, I spotted flashes of bright color, scraps of clothing that could only have belonged to the missing students. "We need to get out of here," Hank whispered urgently. "We need to tell someone, anyone who will listen." I nodded, but as we turned to leave, my foot caught on a root. I stumbled, snapping a twig underfoot. The sound, quiet as it was, echoed through the clearing like a gunshot. The creatures froze. Then as one, turned towards our hiding spot. Their eyes, gleaming with an unnatural intelligence, fixed on us. In that moment, I knew our lives would never be the same. With a chorus of shrieks that seemed to shake the very air around us, the creatures surged towards us. Hank and I ran, crashing through the underbrush, our only thought to put as much distance between us and those abominations as possible. As we fled, I could hear them behind us, moving through the forest with impossible speed and agility. But they weren't just chasing us, I realized with growing horror. They were herding us, driving us in a specific direction. Just as I thought my lungs would burst from the effort, we burst out of the tree line. To my shock, we were back at the main ranger station. How we'd covered so much ground so quickly, I couldn't begin to understand. As we stumbled into the station, gasping for breath and wild-eyed, our colleagues stared at us in confusion and concern. But I knew, deep in my gut, that our problems were just beginning. Whatever balance had existed between our world and theirs had been irreparably shattered. The creatures were done hiding, and we, the unsuspecting humans who had encroached upon their domain, were about to face the consequences of our ignorance. As the alarms began to sound and the station erupted into chaos, I caught Hank's eye. The look we shared was one of grim determination. Whatever was coming, we would face it together. The battle for Olympic National Park, and perhaps for humanity itself, had begun. As spring blossomed into summer, Olympic National Park became a battleground. The incident at the ranger station was just the beginning. Reports flooded in from all corners of the park. Hikers vanishing, rangers encountering creatures that defied description, entire campsites found abandoned with signs of violent struggle. The authorities tried to keep a lid on things, but rumors spread like wildfire. Internet forums buzzed with theories, ranging from government experiments gone wrong to alien invasions. As much as I wanted to dismiss these wild speculations, the truth was even stranger. Hank and I found ourselves at the center of it all. Our encounter in the clearing had made us reluctant experts, the go-to sources for information on the creatures. We spent long hours poring over old maps, cross-referencing sightings, trying to piece together some understanding of what we were up against. One sweltering July afternoon, as we huddled over a map in Hank's cabin, a thought struck me. "Hank," I said, tracing a pattern on the map. "Look at this. The sightings, the disappearances, they're not random, they're forming a pattern." Hank leaned in, his brow furrowed. "Son of a gun," he muttered. "It's like they're marking territory." As we studied the map, a chilling realization dawned on us. The creatures weren't just lashing out randomly. They were systematically reclaiming the park, pushing humans out of areas they considered their domain. Our discoveries led to a change in park policy. Certain areas were declared off-limits, ostensibly for environmental reasons. Rangers were armed, a controversial move that was explained away as a precaution against aggressive wildlife. We were fighting a secret war and losing ground by the day. The summer tourist season brought new challenges. Despite the warnings and restricted areas, people flocked to the park in droves. Each new arrival filled me with dread, knowing that some of them might never make it home. One particularly harrowing incident occurred in late August. A family of 5 had gone missing near one of the restricted areas. Against my better judgment, I volunteered for the search party. As we ventured into the dense forest, the familiar sense of wrongness settled over me. We found the family's campsite in a small clearing. The scene was all too familiar: shredded tents, scattered belongings, and those unnatural claw marks on the surrounding trees. But this time, something was different. Among the chaos, I spotted a child's stuffed animal, miraculously untouched. As I knelt to examine it, I heard a soft whimper from the underbrush nearby. Cautiously I approached, and there, huddled beneath a fallen log, was a young girl, the youngest member of the missing family. Her eyes were wide with terror, and she flinched away as I reached out to her. "It's okay," I said softly, trying to keep my voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I'm here to help. Can you tell me what happened?" The girl's voice was barely a whisper. "The monsters came. They took everyone else. I hid." As I coaxed the child out of her hiding spot, a twig snapped in the forest behind us. I whirled around, instinctively placing myself between the girl and whatever was out there. Through the trees, I caught glimpses of movement. The creatures were circling us, their inhuman shapes flitting between the trunks. I reached for my radio with shaking hands, calling for immediate backup. What followed was a tense standoff. Me, armed with nothing but a standard-issue pistol I knew would be useless against these beings, trying to protect a terrified child. The creatures, for reasons I couldn't fathom, seemed hesitant to attack outright. It felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes, before I heard the blessed sound of approaching vehicles. The creatures melted away into the forest as my fellow rangers arrived, heavily armed and on high alert. As we rushed the girl to safety, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just witnessed a turning point. The creatures had taken most of the family but left the child. Why? Was it a moment of mercy or part of some larger, incomprehensible plan? As summer waned and the leaves began to turn, a sense of foreboding settled over the park like an early frost. The incidents had become more frequent, more brazen. It was as if the creatures were growing bolder, testing our defenses, probing for weaknesses. Hank and I had thrown ourselves into research, spending countless hours in the park's archives and reaching out to experts in fields ranging from cryptozoology to Native American history. Slowly, a picture began to emerge, though it was one that strained the limits of belief. The creatures, it seemed, were ancient guardians of the land, tied to the forest in ways we could barely comprehend. Native legends spoke of them as protectors, maintaining the balance between the natural world and the world of humans. But something had changed, whether due to environmental destruction, human encroachment, or some other factor. These once benevolent entities had become twisted, aggressive. Our breakthrough came on a crisp October morning. An old journal had been discovered in a forgotten corner of the park's archives, dating back to the early days of the park's formation. Its author, a ranger from the 1930s, described encounters eerily similar to what we were experiencing now. But more importantly, he wrote of a potential way to communicate with the creatures, to potentially negotiate a truce. The key, according to the journal, lay in the stone structures scattered throughout the park. The same kind of altar where Hank had found the protective stone years ago. Armed with this new information, Hank and I proposed a dangerous plan to park management. We would venture into the heart of creature territory, to the largest of these stone structures we'd identified. There, we would attempt to make contact, to find a way to end this conflict before it spiraled completely out of control. The plan was met with skepticism and outright disbelief from some quarters. But with the situation growing more desperate by the day, we were given reluctant approval. On a cold, misty morning in late October, Hank and I set out. We were armed, though we both knew our weapons would likely be useless. Our true protection, we hoped, would come from the knowledge we'd gathered and the strange, symbolic items we carried, replicas of artifacts described in the old journal. As we hiked deeper into the forest, the world around us seemed to shift. The trees grew older, more gnarled. The mist thickened, muffling sounds and playing tricks on our vision. More than once I caught glimpses of shadowy figures flitting between the trees, always just at the edge of perception. Finally, we reached our destination. The stone structure loomed before us, ancient and imposing. Symbols carved into its surface pulsed with a faint, otherworldly light. Hank and I shared a look. This was it. Everything we'd learned, everything we'd experienced, had led to this moment. With shaking hands, we began the ritual described in the journal, placing our artifacts in specific patterns around the structure. As the final piece fell into place, the air around us seemed to thicken. The mist swirled, taking on shapes that defied description, and then they appeared. Dozens of creatures surrounding us on all sides, but they made no move to attack. They simply watched, waiting. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward and began to speak, reciting the words we'd so carefully transcribed from the journal. I don't know if it was the words themselves or the intent behind them, but something changed in that moment. The creatures' postures shifted. The hostility that had radiated from them seemed to lessen, and then, impossibly, one of them stepped forward and began to communicate, not in words, but in a series of images and emotions that flooded my mind. I saw the forest as it had been centuries ago, pristine and untouched. I felt the creatures' deep connection to the land, their role as protectors, And I understood their fear and anger at the encroachment of humanity, the destruction of their home. For hours, Hank and I stood in that clearing, engaged in a communication unlike anything I'd ever experienced. We shared our own perspectives, our own fears. We spoke of coexistence, of finding a balance that could work for both our worlds. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, we reached an understanding. It wasn't a perfect solution. There was too much mistrust, too much history for that. But it was a start, a tentative truce, a promise to work towards a future where humans and these ancient guardians could coexist. As Hank and I made our way back to the ranger station, exhausted but filled with a cautious hope, I knew that our work was far from over. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But for the first time since that fateful day when I'd first encountered the creature in the woods, I felt like we had a chance. The seasons had turned full circle, from the spring of my arrival to this autumn of revelation. Olympic National Park had changed me in ways I could never have imagined. As I looked out over the forest, its leaves a riot of red and gold in the fading light, I knew that I would never see the wilderness the same way again. There were wonders out there, and terrors too, beyond anything I had ever dreamed, and I, for better or worse, was now a part of that world. The smell of pine and damp earth filled my nostrils as I stepped out of my truck, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. It was early morning and a thin mist clung to the ground, giving the forest an almost ethereal quality. I took a deep breath, savoring the crisp air that was so different from the stale atmosphere of the ranger station. My name is Ryan Hawkins, and I've been a park ranger at Congaree National Park for the better part of 2 decades. At 45, I've seen my fair share of strange occurrences in these woods, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to encounter. As I made my way towards the ranger station, I couldn't help but reflect on how I ended up here. Back in '07, I was a city boy looking for an escape. The constant noise, the endless sea of concrete, it all felt suffocating. When I saw the job posting for a ranger position at Congaree, it seemed like fate. Now, 18 years later, I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. The station came into view, a modest wooden structure that had weathered countless storms and seasons. Inside, I found my colleague Vern hunched over a steaming mug of coffee. His weathered face looked more haggard than usual. "Morning, Ryan," he grunted, not looking up from his mug. "Got a situation." I poured myself a cup before settling into the chair across from him. "What kind of situation?" Vern sighed, finally meeting my gaze. "Missing campers, 3 of them, 2 guys and a gal, all in their late 20s. They were supposed to check in yesterday, but never showed." A frown creased my brow. Could be nothing. Maybe they lost track of time, or their phones died. That's what I thought too, until I got this. Vern slid a photograph across the desk. I picked it up, and immediately felt my stomach tighten. The image showed a campsite, or what was left of one. Tents were shredded, gear scattered everywhere, but what caught my eye was the dark stains on the torn canvas, unmistakably blood. "Jesus," I muttered. "When was this taken?" "Park drone captured it this morning during a sweep of their last known location. We need to get out there, Ryan." "Whatever did this," Vern trailed off, his eyes distant. I nodded, my mind already racing through the possibilities. Bears were rare in this part of the park, but not unheard of. Still, something about this felt different. "Wrong." "I'll go," I said, standing up. "You coordinate with local law enforcement, get a search party organized. I'll do an initial sweep, see if I can find any survivors." Vern looked relieved. "You sure you want to go alone? I can send one of the new guys with you." I shook my head. "They'll just slow me down. Besides, if there is something dangerous out there, I'd rather not risk an inexperienced ranger." As I gathered my gear, first aid kit, radio, flares, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. In all my years here, I'd never seen anything like that photograph. Whatever had attacked that campsite wasn't just an animal looking for food. The destruction seemed deliberate. I checked my watch, 7:15 a.m. The missing campers had been out there for at least 24 hours already. If any of them were still alive, time was running out. With a final nod to Vern, I stepped back out into the misty morning. The forest loomed before me, its secrets hidden beneath a canopy of ancient trees. As I set off down the trail, the sounds of civilization faded away, replaced by the subtle symphony of nature. Little did I know, something was waiting for me in those woods. Something that would change everything I thought I knew about the world and my place in it. The hunt was about to begin. The trail narrowed as I ventured deeper into the forest. Towering trees blocked out much of the morning light, casting long shadows across the path. I'd hiked this route countless times before, but today felt different. The usual chorus of birdsong was noticeably absent, replaced by an eerie silence that set my nerves on edge. After about an hour of brisk hiking, I reached the approximate location of the campsite from the drone footage. The scene before me was even more disturbing in person. Shredded tents fluttered in the breeze, their fabric stained dark with what I now confirmed was blood. Personal belongings were strewn about haphazardly, a torn backpack here, a mangled shoe there. I knelt down to examine a set of tracks leading away from the campsite. They were unlike anything I'd seen before, too large for a bear, with strange, elongated toes that dug deep into the soft earth. A chill ran down my spine as I realized whatever made these wasn't a normal predator. The smell of pine and damp earth filled my nostrils as I stepped out of my truck, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. It was early morning, and a thin mist clung to the ground, giving the forest an almost ethereal quality. I took a deep breath, savoring the crisp air that was so different from the stale atmosphere of the ranger station. My name is Ryan Hawkins, and I've been a park ranger at Congaree National Park for the better part of 2 decades. At 45, I've seen my fair share of strange occurrences in these woods, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to encounter. As I made my way towards the ranger station, I couldn't help but reflect on how I ended up here. Back in '07, I was a city boy looking for an escape. The constant noise, the endless sea of concrete, it all felt suffocating. When I saw the job posting for a ranger position at Congaree, it seemed like fate. Now, 18 years later, I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. The station came into view, a modest wooden structure that had weathered countless storms and seasons. Inside, I found my colleague Vern hunched over a steaming mug of coffee. His weathered face looked more haggard than usual. "Morning, Ryan," he grunted, not looking up from his mug. "Got a situation." I poured myself a cup before settling into the chair across from him. "What kind of situation?" Vern sighed, finally meeting my gaze. "Missing campers, 3 of them, 2 guys and a gal, all in their late 20s. They were supposed to check in yesterday but never showed." A frown creased my brow. Could be nothing. Maybe they lost track of time, or their phones died. That's what I thought too, until I got this. Vern slid a photograph across the desk. I picked it up, and immediately felt my stomach tighten. The image showed a campsite, or what was left of one. Tents were shredded, gear scattered everywhere, but what caught my eye was the dark stains on the torn canvas, unmistakably blood. "Jesus," I muttered. "When was this taken?" "Park drone captured it this morning during a sweep of their last known location. We need to get out there, Ryan. Whatever did this." Vern trailed off, his eyes distant. I nodded, my mind already racing through the possibilities. Bears were rare in this part of the park, but not unheard of. Still, something about this felt different. "Wrong. I'll go," I said, standing up. "You coordinate with local law enforcement. Get a search party organized. I'll do an initial sweep, see if I can find any survivors." Vern looked relieved. "You sure you want to go alone? I can send one of the new guys with you." I shook my head. "They'll just slow me down. Besides, if there is something dangerous out there, I'd rather not risk an inexperienced ranger." As I gathered my gear, first aid kit, radio, flares, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. In all my years here, I'd never seen anything like that photograph. Whatever had attacked that campsite wasn't just an animal looking for food. The destruction seemed deliberate. I checked my watch, 7:15 a.m. The missing campers had been out there for at least 24 hours already. If any of them were still alive, time was running out. With a final nod to Vern, I stepped back out into the misty morning. The forest loomed before me, its secrets hidden beneath a canopy of ancient trees. As I set off down the trail, the sounds of civilization faded away, replaced by the subtle symphony of nature. Little did I know, something was waiting for me in those woods. Something that would change everything I thought I knew about the world and my place in it. The hunt was about to begin. The trail narrowed as I ventured deeper into the forest. Towering trees blocked out much of the morning light, casting long shadows across the path. I'd hiked this route countless times before, but today felt different. The usual chorus of birdsong was noticeably absent, replaced by an eerie silence that set my nerves on edge. After about an hour of brisk hiking, I reached the approximate location of the campsite from the drone footage. The scene before me was even more disturbing in person. Shredded tents fluttered in the breeze, their fabric stained dark with what I now confirmed was blood. Personal belongings were strewn about haphazardly. A torn backpack here, a mangled shoe there. I knelt down to examine a set of tracks leading away from the campsite. They were unlike anything I'd seen before, too large for a bear, with strange elongated toes that dug deep into the soft earth. A chill ran down my spine as I realized whatever made these wasn't a normal predator. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the trees. "Park ranger, is anyone out here?" No response, just the wind rustling through the leaves. I keyed my radio. "Vern, you copy? I'm at the campsite." No sign of survivors, but something's not right here. These tracks, I've never seen anything like them. Static crackled for a moment before Vern's voice came through. "Copy that, Ryan. Search parties on their way. Should be there in about 2 hours. You want to wait for backup?" I hesitated, looking at the ominous trail leading deeper into the woods. Every instinct told me to stay put, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if anyone was still alive out there, they didn't have 2 hours to wait. "Negative," I replied. "I'm going to follow these tracks, see where they lead. I'll keep in radio contact. Be careful out there, Ryan. Something about this doesn't sit right with me." "You and me both, Fern. I'll check in every 30 minutes. Hawkins out." With a deep breath, I shouldered my pack and set off along the strange trail. The further I went, the denser the forest became. Old-growth trees, their trunks wider than cars, loomed overhead. Moss hung from branches like tattered curtains, and the ground became increasingly boggy. About a mile in, I came across the first body. The sight nearly made me retch. It was one of the male campers, or what was left of him. His chest cavity had been torn open, ribs splayed outward like a grotesque flower. Internal organs were missing, and deep claw marks scored the surrounding trees. This wasn't a predator killing for food, this was something else entirely. I forced myself to approach, fighting back the urge to flee. As a ranger, I'd seen my share of animal attacks, but nothing like this. The precision of the wounds, the calculated violence, it spoke of an intelligence behind the savagery. With shaking hands, I took photos for evidence and marked the location on my GPS. Then I radioed Vern again, my voice barely above a whisper. "Vern, I found one of the campers. He's dead. Looks like he was torn apart. This isn't a normal animal attack. We need to evacuate the park, call in state troopers, maybe even the feds." The radio crackled. "Jesus, Ryan. Get out of there now. Wait for the search party." But even as Vern spoke, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Something large, darting between the trees just at the edge of my vision. My heart began to race. "Vern, I think I saw something. I'm going to investigate. Send help fast." I cut off Vern's protests, turning off the radio to avoid any noise giving away my position. Slowly I crept forward, every sense on high alert. The forest had gone completely silent, as if holding its breath. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I froze, my hand instinctively reaching for the sidearm I'd decided to bring at the last minute. Suddenly, a figure burst from the underbrush. I raised my gun, finger on the trigger, only to realize it was human. A young woman, her clothes torn and bloody, eyes wild with fear. "Run!" she screamed. "It's right behind me." Before I could react, an enormous shape exploded from the trees. In that split second, I caught a glimpse of matted fur, impossibly long limbs, and a face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. I fired 2 shots in rapid succession, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. The creature let out an inhuman shriek and fell back into the shadows. Grabbing the woman's arm, I yelled, "This way, move!" Together we ran through the forest, branches whipping at our faces as we desperately tried to put distance between us and the monster. The woman was sobbing, her breath coming in ragged gasps. What was that thing?" she managed between breaths. "I don't know," I panted. "But we need to get back to the ranger station, now." As we ran, I could hear crashing sounds behind us, growing closer with each passing second. Whatever that thing was, it was fast, and it was hunting us. Our feet pounded against the forest floor, hearts racing as we fled through the dense undergrowth. The woman, who'd managed to gasp out that her name was Mia, was clearly exhausted, her movements becoming more sluggish with each passing minute. "We can't keep going," she wheezed. "It's too fast." I scanned our surroundings, desperate for any kind of shelter or advantage. That's when I spotted it, an old fire tower, its metal frame rusted but still standing, about 100 yards to our left. "There," I pointed. "If we can make it up there, we might have a chance." Mia nodded, summoning a final burst of energy as we changed course. The crashing sounds behind us were getting louder, punctuated by that same bone-chilling growl we'd heard earlier. We reached the base of the tower, and I all but shoved Mia onto the ladder. "Climb! Go! As she scrambled upwards, I turned to face the forest, gun raised. The undergrowth parted, and the creature emerged. In the daylight, I could finally see it clearly. It stood easily 8 feet tall, its body a nightmarish fusion of ape and something else. Matted fur covered most of its frame, but patches of scaly reptilian skin were visible on its chest and elongated arms. Its face was a mess of misshapen features, with a protruding jaw full of razor-sharp teeth and eyes that gleamed with a terrible intelligence. For a moment we stared at each other, predator and prey locked in a silent standoff. Then it charged. I emptied my clip into the monster, the gunshots echoing through the trees. It staggered, dark blood oozing from multiple wounds, but it didn't fall. Instead, it let out a roar of fury and pain that shook me to my core. With no time to reload, I turned and scrambled up the ladder, my hands slipping on the rusted metal. I could hear the creature below, its massive form shaking the entire structure as it began to climb. I reached the top platform where Mia huddled, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. "What do we do now?" she whimpered. My mind raced. We were trapped, with a monster climbing towards us and no way down. That's when I remembered the flare gun in my pack. "Keep an eye on it," I ordered Mia as I dug through my bag. "Tell me when it gets close." My fingers closed around the flare gun just as Mia screamed, "It's coming!" A massive, clawed hand appeared over the edge of the platform. Without hesitation, I aimed and fired the flare directly into the creature's face. The monster recoiled with an agonized howl, losing its grip on the tower. It fell, crashing through branches before hitting the ground with a sickening thud. For a moment, all was quiet. Then, unbelievably, it began to move again. "It's getting up," Mia said, her voice hollow with disbelief. I watched in horror as the creature slowly rose to its feet, its burned face turning towards us with a look of pure hatred. But instead of climbing again, it began to circle the base of the tower, like a shark circling its prey. "It's smart," I muttered. "It knows we're trapped up here." Mia sank to the floor, hugging her knees to her chest. "We're going to die, aren't we?" I didn't answer, my mind frantically searching for a way out of this nightmare. That's when I heard it, the distant thrum of helicopter blades. "The search party," I breathed. "They're coming." As if sensing its time was limited, the creature below let out a furious roar and began to climb again, faster this time, driven by rage and hunger. I grabbed Mia's arm. "When I say now, we jump to that branch there." I pointed to a thick limb from a nearby tree that extended close to the tower. "It's our only chance." She nodded, terror and determination mingling in her eyes. The monster was halfway up now, its claws leaving deep gouges in the metal. The helicopter sound was getting louder, but not fast enough. "Get ready," I said, positioning us on the edge of the platform. The creature was 3/4 of the way up, its jaws snapping in anticipation. "Now!" We leaped just as the monster reached the top of the tower. For a heart-stopping moment, we were in free fall. Then we hit the branch hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I clung to the rough bark, my arms wrapped around Mia to keep her from falling. The creature roared in frustration, trapped on the small platform. That's when the helicopter crested the tree line, its spotlight illuminating the surreal scene. What happened next occurred in a blur. Shots rang out from the helicopter as it hovered nearby. The monster, riddled with bullets, finally fell from the tower, disappearing into the shadows below. As ropes were lowered to pull us into the helicopter, I caught a final glimpse of the forest floor. There was no sign of the creature's body. Shaking and exhausted, Mia and I were pulled to safety. As the helicopter turned back towards civilization, I couldn't shake the feeling that this nightmare was far from over. Something was out there in those woods, something that defied explanation, and I had a sinking feeling we'd only scratched the surface of the terror lurking in the depth of Congaree. The next few days passed in a haze of debriefings, medical examinations, and sleepless nights. Mia and I were quarantined in a local hospital, ostensibly for observation, but I suspected it was more to keep us from talking to the press or anyone else about what we'd seen. Men in dark suits came and went, asking the same questions over and over. What exactly did we see? How big was it? Did it make any sounds? Could it have been a bear or some other known animal? I told them everything, from the shredded campsite to the nightmarish chase through the woods. With each retelling, I could see the doubt growing in their eyes. They didn't believe me, or rather, they didn't want to believe me. On the third day, a man who introduced himself only as Agent Reeves entered my room. Unlike the others, he didn't carry a notebook or recording device. "Mr. Hawkins," he said, his voice low and measured, "I'm here to discuss the Incident in the park. I sat up straighter in my hospital bed. You mean the monster that killed 2 campers and nearly added us to the body count? Reeves' expression didn't change. We've completed our investigation of the area. No unusual tracks were found, and no unidentified animal was located. That's impossible, I protested. I shot it multiple times. There should have been blood, a body. Mr. Hawkins. Reeves cut me off. I understand you've been through a traumatic experience. The human mind often creates explanations for events it can't fully comprehend. What you encountered was likely a large black bear, possibly rabid, which would explain its unusual behavior. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A bear? Are you serious? Did you even look at the claw marks on those trees? The way the victims were torn apart? Reeves sighed, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a document and placed it on the bed tray in front of me. This is a non-disclosure agreement. It states that you will not discuss the events in Congaree National Park with anyone, not the media, not your coworkers, not even your family. Doing so would be a violation of national security. National security? I scoffed. What does that thing have to do with national security? Sign the document, Mr. Hawkins, Reeves said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Once you do, you'll be free to return to work. The official report will state that the campers were killed by a bear attack, and that you and Ms. Chen bravely survived a dangerous animal encounter. That's all anyone needs to know. I stared at the document, my mind reeling. Part of me wanted to refuse to shout the truth from the rooftops, but another part, the part that had seen the impossible with my own eyes, knew that no one would believe me. I'd be labeled a crackpot, lose my job, maybe even end up in a psych ward. With a heavy heart, I signed the paper. Reeves nodded, tucking the document away. You've done the right thing, Mr. Hawkins. For your own safety, and for the safety of others, I suggest you put this incident behind you and move on with your life. As he turned to leave, a thought struck me. Wait, I called out. What about Mia? Is she okay? Reeves paused at the door. Miss Chen has been debriefed and is being released today. She's agreed to relocate to a new city and start fresh. I suggest you do the same. With that, he was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the weight of a secret I could never share. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing at the edge of Congaree National Park, staring into the trees that had once felt like home. Now they loomed ominously, hiding secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. Vern greeted me at the ranger station, his usual gruff demeanor softened by concern. You sure you're ready to be back, Ryan? No one would blame you if you needed more time. I forced a smile. I'm fine, Vern. It was just a bear, right? Nothing I haven't dealt with before. The lie felt bitter on my tongue, but I had no choice. I'd signed away my right to the truth. As I settled back into my routine, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every snapped twig made me jump. I found myself carrying my sidearm even on routine patrols, something I'd never done before. The other rangers noticed the change in me. I overheard whispers, caught concerned glances. They thought I was traumatized, jumpy from my bear encounter. If only they knew the real reason for my unease. Weeks passed, and slowly, life began to return to normal, or as normal as it could be when you're carrying a secret like mine. I threw myself into my work, volunteering for the most remote patrols, spending days at a time in the backcountry. Part of me hoped to find some evidence, some proof that I wasn't crazy. Another part dreaded the thought of encountering that thing again. It was on one of these extended patrols nearly 2 months after the incident that I found something that made my blood run cold. Deep in the park, miles from any official trail, I came across a clearing I'd never seen before. The trees surrounding it were bent and broken, as if something massive had forced its way through. In the center of the clearing was a depression in the earth, roughly the size and shape of a large body, and scattered around it were tufts of matted fur and scales, the same bizarre combination I'd seen on the creature that had hunted us. My heart pounding, I knelt to examine the evidence. This was it, proof that I hadn't imagined everything. But as I reached out to touch one of the fur tufts, a twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, hand on my gun, to find myself face to face with Agent Reeves. I wouldn't touch that if I were you, Mr. Hawkins, he said calmly, as if finding me in the middle of nowhere was a perfectly normal occurrence. What are you doing here? I demanded, my hand still resting on my holstered weapon. Reeves smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I think you know why I'm here, Mr. Hawkins. We've been monitoring your movements since you returned to work. Your extracurricular explorations haven't gone unnoticed. I felt a chill run down my spine. You've been watching me? Why? Because we knew you wouldn't let it go, Reeves said, stepping closer. Men like you, who've seen what you've seen, they can't help but search for answers. And are you here to give me those answers? I asked, my voice hard. Reeves shook his head. No, Mr. Hawkins. I'm here to remind you of the agreement you signed. This area is off limits. What happened here, what you think you saw, it's better left alone. Better for who? I shot back. People are dead, Reeves. That thing is still out there. How many more have to die before you admit the truth? For a moment I saw something flicker in Reeves' eyes, regret perhaps. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Go home, Mr. Hawkins, he said firmly. Forget about this place, forget about what you saw. It's for your own good. As he turned to leave, I called out, and if I don't, if I keep looking. Reeves paused, looking back over his shoulder. Then the next time we meet, it won't be for a friendly chat. With that, he disappeared into the trees, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the unsettling evidence before me. Despite Reeves' warning, or perhaps because of it, I couldn't let go of my obsession. The incident in the clearing only fueled my determination to uncover the truth. I began spending more and more time in the deepest parts of the park, neglecting my regular duties and drawing concerned looks from my colleagues. Vern confronted me one evening as I was preparing for another extended patrol. Ryan, this has got to stop, he said, his voice gruff but laced with worry. You're running yourself into the ground. Whatever you're looking for out there, it's not worth your sanity. I wanted to tell him everything. About the creature, about Reeves and his threats, about the evidence I'd found. But the words caught in my throat. I couldn't risk dragging Vern into this mess. I'm fine, I lied, shouldering my pack. Just doing my job. Vern shook his head, disappointment clear on his weathered face. No, son, you're not. But I can't stop you. Just be careful out there. As I set off into the gathering dusk, I couldn't shake the feeling that this might be the last time I saw Vern, or any of my colleagues. For days I trekked through the most remote areas of the park, following half-seen tracks and strange markings on trees. My obsession had become all-consuming, driving me deeper into the wilderness and further from the man I used to be. It was on the 5th day, as I was setting up camp in a small clearing, that I heard it, that same low, guttural growl that had haunted my nightmares for months. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly I turned towards the sound. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood the creature. It was just as massive and terrifying as I remembered, its misshapen form silhouetted against the darkening sky. But this time, I was prepared. I raised my rifle, aiming for its head. Not this time, you bastard, I muttered, squeezing the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing through the trees. The creature staggered but didn't fall. Instead, it let out a roar of fury and charged. I fired again and again, each shot finding its mark, but the monster kept coming. It was as if bullets meant nothing to it. As it closed the distance between us, I realized with horror that I was about to meet the same fate as those poor campers months ago. But just as the creature reached me, a blinding light flooded the clearing. The monster recoiled, shrieking in pain. I blinked, momentarily blinded myself. As my vision cleared, I saw a group of figures in hazmat suits emerging from the trees, wielding what looked like high-powered spotlights. The creature, howling in agony, retreated into the darkness. One of the figures approached me. When they spoke, I recognized Reeves' voice. I told you to let it go, Hawkins, he said, his tone a mixture of anger and resignation. Now you've left us no choice. Before I could respond, I felt a sharp pain in my neck. As darkness closed in around me, I saw Reeves shaking his head. I'm sorry, he said, but some secrets have to stay buried. I awoke to the sterile smell of disinfectant and the soft beep of medical equipment. As my vision cleared, I found myself in what looked like a hospital room, but something was off. There were no windows, and the door appeared to be reinforced steel. A voice from the corner of the room made me start. Welcome back to the land of the living, Mr. Hawkins. I turned to see Reeves sitting in a chair, watching me with an unreadable expression. Where am I? I croaked, my throat dry. Somewhere safe, Reeves replied cryptically. Somewhere where we can have an honest conversation about what you've seen and what you know. Over the next few hours, Reeves explained everything. The creature I'd encountered wasn't a singular anomaly, but part of a larger phenomenon. Deep in the remote areas of national parks across the country, there were tiers in reality, places where the laws of nature broke down, allowing things from elsewhere to cross over. We've been dealing with these incursions for decades, Reeves said, keeping them contained, cleaning up the messes when containment fails. But lately it's been getting worse. The tiers are becoming more frequent, harder to control. I listened in stunned silence. my worldview shattering and reforming with each revelation. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. Reeves leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Because we need people like you, Hawkins. People who've seen the truth and haven't broken under the weight of it. We're fighting a war that most of the world doesn't even know exists, and we're losing ground every day." He stood, moving to the door. "Rest. Think about what I've said. Tomorrow, you'll have a choice to make." As the door closed behind him, I lay back, my mind reeling. I thought of the creature in the woods, of the terror in Mia's eyes, of the campers who'd lost their lives. And I knew, deep down, what my choice would be. The next morning, I made my decision. I couldn't go back to my old life, not with what I knew now. And if there was a chance I could help prevent others from experiencing the horror I'd faced in those woods, I had to take it. Reeves seemed unsurprised by my choice. He led me through the facility, a vast underground complex I learned was beneath the very national park I'd once patrolled. "Welcome to Project Threshold," he said as we entered a large operations room filled with monitors and busy personnel. "Our mission is to monitor, contain, and when necessary, neutralize extra-dimensional threats." Over the following weeks, I underwent intensive training. I learned about the different types of entities we faced, the technology we used to detect and contain the tiers, and the harsh realities of our secret war. It wasn't easy. The nightmares persisted, now populated not just by the creature I'd encountered, but by a menagerie of horrors I'd seen in classified files. But for the first time since that fateful day in the woods, I felt like I had a purpose. 6 months after my disappearance from Congaree, I found myself back in those familiar woods. But this time, I wasn't alone, and I wasn't unprepared. As our team moved silently through the underbrush, advanced sensors scanning for anomalies, I caught a familiar scent on the wind, pine and damp earth, the smell that had once meant home. A low growl echoed through the trees and I felt the old fear rise up. But this time, it was tempered by determination and the knowledge that I was no longer helpless. I raised my weapon, a far cry from the simple rifle I'd once carried, and nodded to my team. Whatever came through that tier, whatever nightmares emerged from the darkness, we would be ready. As we pushed deeper into the woods, towards the source of the disturbance, I realized that my life had come full circle. Once I'd sought escape in these forests. Now I was their guardian, protecting not just the park and its visitors, but the very fabric of reality itself. The growl came again, closer this time. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what was to come. This was my purpose now. This was my new wilderness, and I was ready to face whatever emerged from the shadows. Datis were. I always said that a person could go their whole life without knowing just how lucky they were. Until they weren't. It was 1997, somewhere deep in the Cascade Range, Washington. I don't remember the exact trail. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd log into a report, but it was the kind of place that could eat someone alive if you weren't paying attention. Name's Leo Dermott. Been a ranger for 15 years, mostly for the solitude. Some people think it's about loving nature. Nah, it's about getting away from people. The trees don't lie to you. Don't try to sell you something you don't want. Out here I could avoid the calls from my ex-wife, the suffocating small-town chatter, and the ever-growing suspicion that I'd made all the wrong choices. You spend enough time in the backcountry, you see things. Dead hikers, wildlife attacks, and the occasional lunatic who decided to go off-grid permanently. You become numb to it. But that day it wasn't any of the usual suspects. The morning had started like any other. I'd woken up in my small cabin, the smell of pine and last night's coffee still lingering in the air. I'd gone through my usual routine, a quick breakfast, a check of my gear, and a glance at the weather report. Clear skies, mild temperatures, perfect hiking weather, too perfect maybe. As I stepped out onto my porch, I felt a strange heaviness in the air. The birds were quieter than usual, and the wind seemed to whisper through the trees with an eerie persistence. I shrugged it off. In this job, you learn to ignore the little things that set your nerves on edge. If you didn't, you'd never leave your cabin. I set out on my usual patrol, the crunch of gravel under my boots a familiar comfort. The trail wound through dense forest, occasionally opening up to reveal breathtaking views of distant peaks. But even as I admired the scenery, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way the shadows seemed to linger a little too long in the corners of my vision, or how the usual rustling of small animals in the underbrush was conspicuously absent. I'd been doing this job long enough to trust my instincts, and right now they were screaming that something wasn't right. As noon approached, I found myself in a small clearing, taking a break and sipping water from my canteen. That's when the radio crackled to life, breaking the unnatural silence that had settled over the forest. Ranger Dermot. We got reports of a missing person. Hiker didn't check in at the ranger station. Think you can handle that? Dispatch's voice was static-filled, more out of habit than worry. I wasn't surprised. Missing hikers were as common as lost wallets around here. I responded in the affirmative and set out, my earlier unease momentarily forgotten in the face of a routine task. No real details were provided. A solo hiker, middle-aged, male. No one said if he was experienced, but most of the time it didn't matter. Experience doesn't count when you're overconfident. As I headed down an old trail that wasn't even on most maps anymore, I couldn't help but reflect on the irony. People shouldn't have been there, but they always found a way. It was human nature, I suppose. The constant need to push boundaries to explore the unknown, even when the unknown pushed back. Little did I know, as I ventured deeper into the forest, that this routine missing person case would lead me into a nightmare beyond anything I could have imagined. The trees loomed overhead, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, and for the first time in years, I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. Something was waiting for me in these woods. Something that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the natural world and my place in it. And as the shadows lengthened and the day wore on, I walked unknowingly towards an encounter that would change my life forever. I'd been walking for hours, the air getting thicker and the forest quieter. You could hear the underbrush crackle beneath my boots. Nothing else. That's when I caught sight of something out of place, a smear of bright red on a branch about 20 feet off the trail. It wasn't much, could have been anything. A scrape, maybe someone fell, but it had that weird intensity, the kind that kicks up the hairs on your neck. Blood in the woods always does that. I knelt and studied it, trying to figure out what I was dealing with. Fresh, wet, somebody was hurt recently. My usual reaction was a sigh and an eye roll, figuring some idiot had twisted their ankle and left a bloody trail for me to follow. But it wasn't that easy. Something about this blood felt different, wrong, somehow. I radioed it in, giving dispatch my coordinates. Said I was checking it out. You know, the procedural stuff. But as I spoke into the radio, my voice sounded hollow and distant, as if the forest itself was swallowing the sound. As I moved deeper off the trail, the undergrowth thickened. It was the kind of stuff people with no sense would push through and regret later. Thorny vines and low-hanging branches seemed to reach out, trying to impede my progress. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. The blood didn't seem like a random accident. It was more like someone or something was marking its path. Each new smear of red I found was deliberate, almost artistic in its placement. It was as if whatever had left these marks wanted to be followed. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I pressed on, my senses on high alert. The forest had taken on a dreamlike quality, the trees blurring together in a sea of green and brown. Time seemed to lose all meaning. Had I been walking for minutes or hours? The light filtering through the canopy had a strange reddish tint, as if the sun itself was bleeding. Another hour or so and I found it. A mangled mess of nylon, dirt, and splintered bone. The remains of a backpack torn to shreds. It wasn't just damage, though. Something was different about it. You see enough animal attacks and you start to know what to expect. But this was calculated. I knelt beside the ruined pack, my hands shaking slightly as I examined the damage. The material hadn't just been ripped. It had been methodically shredded. Long, precise cuts ran along the seams, as if whatever had done this had intimate knowledge of how the pack was constructed. Inside, what remained of the hiker's supplies was scattered about. A crushed water bottle, the contents long since seeped into the forest floor. A map, torn into confetti-like pieces, and a journal. Its pages stained with something dark and viscous that I desperately hoped wasn't blood. With trembling fingers, I opened the journal to its last entry. The handwriting was erratic, barely legible. It's watching me. Always watching. Not animal, not human. God help me, I don't know what it is. If anyone finds this, don't. The writing trailed off into a violent scrawl, as if the pen had been forcibly ripped away. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But I couldn't. It was my job to find this person, or at least discover what had happened to them. As I stood, a twig snapped somewhere behind me. I whirled around, my heart pounding in my chest. The forest had gone completely silent, not even the whisper of wind through the leaves. I stood perfectly still, straining my ears for any sound, Any hint of movement, nothing. But as I turned back to the shredded backpack, I noticed something I had missed before. A set of tracks leading away from the scene. They weren't animal tracks, at least not any animal I recognized. They were too large, too oddly shaped, and they were fresh. With a deep breath, I made a decision that would haunt me for years to come. I began to follow the tracks deeper into the heart of the forest, towards whatever nightmare awaited me. It was getting darker now. The light didn't disappear quickly in the forest, but it felt like it did. I grabbed my flashlight, casting an orange glow on the mess in front of me. No body, just more blood. It was smeared all over the ground, like someone had been dragged, but not by something small. I figured a bear at first. I mean, what else could shred a man and toss him like a rag doll? But there were no tracks, none. Bears don't care about hiding their tracks. This was something else entirely, something that didn't want to leave a trace. The beam of my flashlight danced across the forest floor, revealing more of the strange tracks I had noticed earlier. They were deeper now, as if whatever had made them was carrying something heavy. My mind flashed to the missing hiker, and I felt bile rise in my throat. I kept searching, muttering to myself about how I wasn't getting paid enough for this, cracking jokes that even the forest didn't seem to find funny. Humor had always been my defense mechanism, a way to keep the darkness at bay. But out here, in this unnatural silence, my words fell flat, swallowed up by the oppressive atmosphere. I followed the trail of blood deeper into the trees, each step feeling like I was wading through molasses. The air had grown thick and heavy, filled with an odd metallic scent that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't long before I heard something. At first it sounded like a snapping branch, then a low thud like something heavy being dragged. My breath caught for a second, and I did something I probably shouldn't have. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there? This is Ranger Dermot. I'm here to help." No answer, of course. But the dragging sound stopped, and it was replaced by a rhythmic scraping like metal on stone. Now I've dealt with poachers and weirdos before, but this was different. It didn't feel right. Something inside me told me to turn around, to run as fast and as far as I could. But hell if I ever listened to good advice. I stepped forward, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers trying to hold me back. But I pressed on, driven by a mixture of duty and morbid curiosity. I emerged into a small clearing, and that's when I saw him, or what was left of him. The missing hiker. His body was bent at an angle that nature didn't intend. Limbs twisted, face half gone, the ground beneath him soaked in blood, and the worst part? His legs from the knee down were gone. Clean cut, like someone had taken a saw to him. But there were no tools, no signs of struggle. It was as if whatever had done this had simply willed the man's legs away. I backed up, trying not to puke, my mind reeling from the impossible scene before me. Then I saw it. A movement behind the trees. My flashlight caught something, but it was fast, too fast. My heart pounded. Whatever it was watching me. I know it sounds like some paranoid campfire story, but I'm telling you, that thing was waiting for me. It had lured me here, led me step by step into its domain. And now, as I stood there surrounded by the evidence of its handiwork, I realized with horrifying clarity that I was no longer the hunter. I was the prey. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. In that moment, standing there with my pitiful flashlight and my utterly inadequate training, I felt smaller and more vulnerable than I ever had in my life. Whatever was out there in the darkness, it wasn't natural. It wasn't something that could be explained by science or reason. It was a nightmare made flesh, and it had me exactly where it wanted me. As the realization sank in, I heard it again. That scraping sound, closer now, much closer. And this time it was accompanied by something else. A low guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I drew my knife, not that it'd do much good. I wasn't armed beyond that, just standard issue gear. I didn't carry a gun because, frankly, I'd never needed one. If something was going to get you out here, it wasn't going to give you time to pull a trigger. But as I stood there, knife in one hand and flashlight in the other, I wished more than anything that I had something, anything more substantial to defend myself with. Because whatever was out there in the darkness, whatever had done this to the hiker, it wasn't going to be deterred by a few inches of steel. The sound of heavy footsteps circled the clearing, then stopped. I spun around, flashlight darting across the trees, but nothing. It was quiet again, unnervingly so. That's when I realized the silence wasn't natural. Not a single bird, not even the hum of insects. It was like the forest was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I had two choices, bolt or stand my ground. My instincts were screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But I didn't. I was too stupid, too stubborn, or maybe both. I stayed, scanning the trees, trying to make out whatever the hell was lurking out there. And then it stepped out, slow, deliberate. What I saw in that moment would haunt my nightmares for years to come. I can't describe it perfectly because, honestly, I've never seen anything like it. It was hunched, tall, covered in this matted, almost oily fur. But that wasn't what caught my attention. It was its limbs, too long, ending in something more like talons than hands. The body was like some kind of grotesque parody of a predator, a twisted amalgamation of every nightmarish creature I'd ever imagined. But its face, God, its face looked too human. The jaw hung unnaturally low, like it could unhinge at will, and there were remnants of that poor hiker's flesh still clinging to it. Its eyes, if you could call them that, were sunken deep into its skull, glowing with an otherworldly intelligence that sent chills down my spine. This wasn't just some animal acting on instinct. There was purpose behind those eyes, a malevolent consciousness that seemed to bore right through me. For a moment, we just stared at each other, me, rooted to the spot, my knife hand trembling. It, standing there at the edge of the clearing, regarding me with what I could only describe as cruel amusement. The air between us crackled with tension, like the moment before a lightning strike, and then it moved. I'd like to say I stood my ground, that I faced the monster with courage and determination. But that would be a lie. I did the only thing I could. I ran. Now, I'm not some marathon runner, but adrenaline can make you fly. I didn't look back. I heard it crashing through the trees behind me, close enough that I could feel the ground vibrate with each step it took. I stumbled, tripping over roots and rocks, swearing with every breath. It was fast, faster than anything I've seen in these woods. It wasn't just trying to catch me, it was toying with me. The thing let out a strange wheezing noise, almost like laughter. That's when I knew it wasn't just hunting. It enjoyed this. Branches whipped at my face as I ran, leaving stinging cuts across my cheeks. My lungs burned, screaming for air, but I didn't dare slow down. I could hear it right behind me, its hot breath on the back of my neck, those impossible talons just inches from my back. The ranger station wasn't close enough. I veered off the trail, diving into a dense patch of trees, hoping to lose it in the underbrush. I managed to crawl under some thick brush and huddled there, listening. The footsteps slowed, getting closer, but more calculated now, like it was sniffing me out. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat feeling like it might give me away. I didn't breathe, didn't move. I just watched, praying it would pass by. I could see its deformed silhouette against the fading daylight, moving with an unnatural grace that defied its monstrous appearance. It stopped a few feet away, sniffing the air. I could hear it breathing, a wet, raspy sound that sent shivers down my spine. It was so close that I could smell it, a horrific mix of rotting meat and something else, something alien and indescribable. For what felt like an eternity, it stood there, searching. I was sure it would find me, that at any moment those talons would rip through the brush and tear me to shreds. But then, miraculously, it turned and loped away, dragging something heavy behind it. I waited until the sound disappeared entirely before I dared to move. I crawled out, shaken but alive. My legs barely worked, but I forced myself back toward the fur station. Every step felt like I was moving through molasses. By the time I reached the clearing, the sky had dimmed completely. No sign of the creature. I burst through the door of the ranger station, locked it behind me, and slumped against the wall. The radio buzzed, but I didn't touch it. What the hell was I supposed to say? That something out there had killed that man and almost had me? They'd think I was crazy. Hell, I thought I was crazy. I spent the night in the station, jumping at every sound, my knife clutched tightly in my hand. When morning came, I half expected to find it all had been some sort of twisted nightmare. But the cuts on my face and the dirt on my clothes told a different story. They didn't find the hiker's body until 2 days later, or what was left of it. I didn't give them details. What was the point? They wouldn't believe me. And even if they did, what could they do? I filed the report, kept it as clean as I could, but the truth? I couldn't shake what I'd seen. That thing was still out there, waiting in the shadows of the forest, and I had a sinking feeling that this was far from over. The weeks following my encounter were a blur of sleepless nights and paranoid days. Every shadow seemed to hide that monstrous form. Every rustle in the trees sent my heart racing. I threw myself into my work, patrolling areas closer to civilization, avoiding the deep woods where I knew it lurked. But I couldn't escape the memories. They haunted me, creeping into my dreams and turning them into nightmares. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the creature's inhuman eyes boring into my soul. My colleagues noticed the change in me. Gone was the easygoing, joke-cracking Leo they knew. In his place was a jumpy, irritable shell of a man. They chalked it up to stress, maybe PTSD from finding the hiker's remains. If only they knew the truth. I started researching, digging through old reports and local legends, looking for any hint that others might have encountered this thing before. Most of what I found was useless, campfire stories and urban legends, but there were a few accounts that gave me pause. A trapper in the 1800s describing a devil beast that walked like a man but moved faster than any animal he'd ever seen. A group of loggers in the 1950s who refused to return to a certain part of the forest after their camp was destroyed by something they couldn't explain. And then there were the missing persons reports, so many of them stretching back decades. Most were written off as accidents or animal attacks. But now, knowing what I knew, I couldn't help but wonder how many of them had fallen victim to the creature I'd encountered. As I dug deeper, I started to notice a pattern. The disappearances seemed to cluster around certain areas, and they occurred in cycles. Every few years there would be a spike in missing hikers and campers and then nothing for a while. It was hunting, methodically, patiently, and if I was right about the pattern, it was due to start again soon. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit back and let more people fall victim to this thing. But what could I do? I was just one man, armed with nothing but a knife and a flashlight. Going up against that creature again would be suicide. But then I remembered the fear in its eyes when my flashlight beam had caught it. The way it had hesitated just for a moment before charging. Maybe, just maybe, it had weaknesses, and if it did, I was going to find them. I started preparing. I gathered every piece of information I could find about the area where I'd encountered it. I pored over maps, marking the locations of previous disappearances. I even started working out, pushing my body to its limits. If I was going to face this thing again, I needed to be ready. All the while, I kept up my duties as a ranger. I warned hikers away from the areas I suspected were its hunting grounds. I increased patrols in the danger zones. But I knew it wasn't enough. Sooner or later, someone was going to stumble into its territory. And when they did, I had to be ready. As the weeks turned into months, my obsession grew. My cabin walls became covered with maps and notes. I barely slept, spending my nights poring over old books on local folklore and cryptozoology. I was determined to understand what this thing was, where it came from, and how to stop it. But the more I learned, the more questions I had. This creature didn't fit into any known category. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a wolf, wasn't anything that should exist in this world. So what was it? And more importantly, how many more of them were out there? The answer came on a cold autumn night, nearly 6 months after my first encounter. I was on a late patrol, skirting the edge of the area I now thought of as its territory. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Just like that day. And then I heard it. That familiar scraping sound, followed by a low, guttural growl. My blood ran cold. It was back. And this time I wasn't running. I stood there, frozen, as the sound grew closer. My hand instinctively went to the knife at my belt, but I knew it would be useless against the creature. This time, I was prepared. Or at least, I hoped I was. In the months since our last encounter, I'd made some modifications to my gear. My flashlight was now equipped with the brightest bulb I could find, remembering how the creature had reacted to the light before. I'd also brought along a flare gun, not standard issue, but I figured if this thing didn't like light, a flare might just give me the edge I needed. The growling grew louder, and I could hear the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the underbrush. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure the creature could hear it. But I stood my ground, waiting. Suddenly it burst from the trees, just as horrifying as I remembered. Those long, twisted limbs, that too-human face contorted into a snarl, and those eyes, glowing with malevolent intelligence. For a moment we just stared at each other. I could see recognition in its eyes. It remembered me too. And then it charged. I was ready this time. I dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding its slashing talons. As it passed, I brought up my flashlight, clicking it on and aiming the beam directly at its face. The effect was immediate. The creature recoiled, letting out a shriek that was part pain, part rage. It wasn't enough to stop it, but it gave me the opening I needed. I ran, not away from it this time, but deeper into the woods. I had a plan. Over the past months, I'd scouted this area extensively. I knew every tree, every rock, every dip in the terrain, and I was leading it exactly where I wanted it to go. The creature recovered quickly and gave chase. I could hear it crashing through the trees behind me, gaining ground with every step, but I just needed to stay ahead for a little longer. I burst into a small clearing, one I'd prepared for this very purpose. Strung between the trees were several high-powered floodlights, all connected to a portable generator. As I raced across the clearing, I hit the switch. The forest exploded with light. The creature, hot on my heels, stumbled into the clearing and was caught in the glare. It let out a scream that made my blood run cold, a sound of pure agony. I turned to face it, flare gun raised. The creature was writhing in the light, its oily fur smoking slightly. For the first time, I saw fear in those inhuman eyes. But even as I prepared to fire the flare, something unexpected happened. The creature spoke. "Wait," it rasped, its voice a horrifying mix of growl and human speech. "You don't understand." I hesitated, my finger on the trigger. This was my chance to end it, to rid the forest of this monster once and for all. But curiosity got the better of me. "Understand what?" I demanded. The creature's form seemed to shimmer and shift in the harsh light. "We were here first," it said. "Long before your kind. This is our home." My mind reeled. We? There were more of them? And what did it mean they were here first? But before I could ask any more questions, the generator sputtered and died. The lights flickered and went out, plunging us back into darkness. In that moment of blindness, I felt a rush of air as the creature moved. When my eyes adjusted, it was gone. But its last words echoed in my mind. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The encounter in the clearing left me shaken but more determined than ever. The creature could speak. It had history, intelligence. This wasn't just some animal, but something far more complex and dangerous. I threw myself back into research with renewed vigor. If these things had been here first, as it claimed, there had to be some record of them. I dug deeper into local history, focusing on the earliest settlers and the Native American tribes that had lived in these mountains long before. What I found chilled me to the bone. There were stories passed down through generations of shadow people who lived in the deepest parts of the forest. Beings that were neither human nor animal, that could move faster than the eye could see and had an insatiable hunger for human flesh. The tribes had respected and feared these creatures, leaving offerings to appease them and warning their children never to venture too deep into the woods. But when European settlers arrived, they dismissed these stories as superstition. They logged the forests, built roads and towns, encroaching further and further into the creatures' territory. And now, it seemed, the creatures were pushing back. I compiled my findings, creating a detailed report of everything I'd learned. But as I stared at the pages spread out before me, I realized I couldn't share this. Who would believe me? I'd be labeled a crackpot, probably fired from my job, and then who would be left to protect people from these things? No. I had to handle this myself. But I needed more information. I needed to communicate with one of these creatures again, to understand what they wanted and why they were killing. It was a risky plan bordering on suicidal. But I was out of options. I gathered my gear, the modified flashlight, the flare gun, and this time a digital recorder. If I was going to confront this thing again, I wanted evidence. I chose my spot carefully. A small cave system I'd discovered during my research. According to the tribal stories, these caves had once been sacred to the shadow people. If anywhere was likely to draw them out, it was here. As night fell, I made my way to the cave entrance. The forest around me was eerily silent, as if every living thing knew to stay away. I took a deep breath, switched on my recorder, and entered the darkness. The cave was cool and damp, the beam of my flashlight barely penetrating the gloom. I moved slowly, careful not to make too much noise. Every shadow seemed to move, every drip of water sounded like footsteps, and then I heard it. That familiar scraping sound, echoing off the cave walls. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was what I had come for. "I know you're there," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "I want to talk." For a long moment, there was silence. Then, from the darkness ahead, came that rasping voice. "You are either very brave or very foolish, human." The creature stepped into view, its form seeming to materialize out of the shadows themselves. In the confined space of the cave, it looked even larger, more menacing. "Why are you killing people?" I demanded, fighting to keep my voice from shaking. The creature tilted its head, those glowing eyes fixed on me. "We hunt to survive, as all creatures do. Your kind has taken our hunting grounds, driven us into the deepest parts of the forest. We must eat." "But why now?" I pressed. "You've been here for centuries. Why are the killings increasing?" A low growl rumbled from the creature's throat. "We grow fewer. Our young struggle to survive in this changed world. We must feed them, make them strong." The implications of its words hit me like a punch to the gut. These weren't just random attacks, this was a species fighting for survival. But before I could respond, the creature tensed. Its nostrils flared, and it let out a snarl that made my blood run cold. "You brought others," it growled, fury evident in its voice. I shook my head, confused. "No, I came alone," but then I heard it too. Voices, coming from the cave entrance. Flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. In my obsession, I had been careless. Someone had followed me. The creature's eyes locked with mine, filled with a mix of anger and what I could only describe as betrayal. Then, faster than I could blink, it was gone, melting back into the shadows. I stood there, frozen, as the voices grew closer. I recognized them now. Other rangers, probably sent to check on me after my erratic behavior of the past months. As their lights fell on me, I quickly switched off my recorder and plastered what I hoped was a convincing smile on my face. But even as I let them lead me out of the cave, my mind was racing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And now, with others involved, the stakes were higher than ever. The weeks following the cave incident were tense. My colleagues were suspicious, asking questions I couldn't answer truthfully. I was put on administrative leave, pending a psychological evaluation. They thought I was having some sort of breakdown. If only they knew the truth. I used my time off to plan. The creature's words haunted me. They were fighting for survival, yes, but at what cost? How many more innocent hikers and campers would fall victim to their hunger? I couldn't just sit back and let it happen. But I also couldn't bring myself to simply hunt them down and exterminate them. They were intelligent beings, the last of their kind. There had to be another way. That's when an idea began to form. It was risky, potentially disastrous if it went wrong, but it was the only solution I could see that didn't end in more bloodshed. I spent days preparing, gathering supplies, and making arrangements. When everything was ready, I headed back into the forest, deep into the creature's territory. This time, I didn't try to hide my presence. I wanted them to find me. I set up camp in a small clearing, built a fire, and waited. As night fell, the forest grew quiet. That familiar, oppressive silence settled over the trees. They were coming. I stood, facing the darkness beyond the firelight. "I know you're out there," I called. "I've come to make a proposal." For a long moment there was nothing. Then, slowly, they emerged from the shadows. Not just one this time, but 3 of the creatures. The largest, which I recognized from our previous encounters, stepped forward. "Speak, human," it growled. "What proposal could you possibly offer us?" I took a deep breath. This was it. "A sanctuary," I said. "A protected area deep in the forest, where you can live and hunt without fear of human encroachment." The creatures exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. "And how would you accomplish this?" the leader asked, skepticism evident in its voice. "I have connections," I explained. "I can have this area declared a protected wildlife reserve. No logging, no development, no hikers or campers. It would be yours." "In exchange for what?" the creature demanded. "An end to the killings," I said firmly. "You stay in your territory, we stay in ours. Any humans who accidentally wander in are to be scared off, not hunted." The creatures conferred among themselves, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. Finally, the leader turned back to me. "And if we refuse?" I steeled myself. "Then I'll have no choice but to reveal your existence to the world. You'll be hunted, studied, maybe wiped out entirely." It was a bluff, of course. I had no intention of exposing them, but they didn't know that. The leader studied me for a long moment, its inhuman eyes seeming to peer into my very soul. Then, slowly it nodded. "We accept your proposal, human, but know this. If your kind breaks this agreement, if they encroach on our territory, we will not show mercy." I nodded, relief washing over me. "I understand, and thank you." As the creatures melted back into the darkness, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It was done. A truce, of sorts, had been struck. In the months that followed, I pulled every string I could to make good on my promise. It wasn't easy, and there were times I thought I'd fail. But eventually, a large swath of the deepest, most remote part of the forest was declared a protected wildlife reserve, closed to all human activity. I never told anyone the real reason behind my push for the reserve. As far as the world was concerned, it was just an effort to protect endangered species and preserve the natural environment. But I knew the truth. And I knew the truth. And every time I looked out at those dense, forbidding woods, I was reminded of the secret they held. I still work as a ranger, though I stick to the more populated areas now. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I think I hear that familiar scraping sound in the distance. a reminder of the pact we made. I always said that a person could go their whole life without knowing just how lucky they were. Until they weren't. That day in the forest changed everything for me. It opened my eyes to a world beyond what most people can imagine. A world where ancient creatures still lurk in the shadows. Some nights, I wonder if I made the right choice. If the truce will hold, if I've done enough to protect both sides. But then I remember the alternative. Endless bloodshed, a war that would likely end in extinction for them and untold human casualties. No, this was the best solution. An uneasy peace, but peace nonetheless. I never told anyone the full story of what happened out there. Who would believe me? But I carry it with me always. A reminder that the world is bigger, stranger, and more dangerous than we know. And as for those woods, well, if you're ever hiking in the Cascade Range and you come across warnings about a restricted wildlife area, take my advice. Turn back. Some parts of this world aren't meant for us. Some secrets are best left in the shadows, because out there, in the deepest, darkest parts of the forest, something is watching, waiting, and it remembers. The last thing I expected when I took this job was to be stuck cleaning up after a bunch of careless campers, yet here I was, knee-deep in trash left behind by some hikers who apparently thought the woods were their personal landfill. It was 2025, and I had been working as a park ranger for about 6 months at Washington's Olympic National Park. Not the most glamorous job, but it beat the cubicle life I had tried and failed to tolerate back in Seattle. My name's Sam Jenkins, and I guess you could say I'm the kind of guy who enjoys solitude. Nothing wrong with people, but I've always found being in the middle of nowhere suits me better. After my failed stint in tech, I figured I'd give the outdoors a try. I grew up in Oregon, spent most of my childhood camping and hiking, so it felt like a natural fit. What could go wrong, right? There's a stretch of the park that few visitors venture to, old-growth forest where the trees are so thick you can lose yourself just walking a few feet in. It's peaceful in a way that makes you feel like you've stepped back in time. And in a place like this, you don't expect much trouble aside from the occasional bear sighting or lost hiker. That day, I was heading out to clear up after a group of hikers that didn't bother to pack out their trash. They had set up camp near one of the more remote trails, a place called Moonfalls. The Park Service had gotten complaints about the smell. Apparently, they left behind more than just garbage: a tent, a half-eaten meal, and an abandoned cooler. Weird, but not unheard of. Sometimes people leave in a hurry, thinking they'll come back later. As I drove down the winding forest road, the dense canopy overhead cast dappled shadows across my windshield. The air grew thicker, more oppressive with each mile. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I chalked it up to the gloomy weather and my own restless mind. When I arrived at the trailhead, the silence hit me like a physical force. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just an eerie stillness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I grabbed my gear from the truck, a heavy-duty trash bag, gloves, and a long-handled grabber, and set off down the trail. The path to Moonfalls was overgrown, barely visible in places. Ferns brushed against my legs as I pushed through, leaving damp streaks on my khaki uniform pants. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying vegetation, a smell I usually found comforting but today seemed almost cloying. As I hiked, my mind wandered to how I'd ended up here. Just a year ago, I was slouched in an ergonomic chair staring at lines of code until my eyes blurred. The startup I worked for had promised to revolutionize social media, but all it did was suck the life out of me. One day, I just snapped, walked out of the office, and never looked back. My parents thought I was having a quarter-life crisis when I told them I was becoming a park ranger. Maybe I was, but out here, surrounded by towering cedars and the distant rush of unseen streams, I felt more alive than I ever had in that sterile office. The trail curved sharply, and suddenly, Moonfalls came into view. Under normal circumstances, it would have been breathtaking, a silver ribbon of water cascading down a sheer rock face, feeding into a crystal-clear pool below. But today, the beauty was marred by the detritus of human carelessness. Candy wrappers glinted in the underbrush. A soggy mass of paper plates and plastic utensils lay scattered near the water's edge. And there, just as reported, stood 3 abandoned tents, their brightly colored fabric a garish intrusion on the natural landscape. I sighed and got to work, methodically picking up trash and stuffing it into my bag. As I worked, a nagging sense of unease grew in the pit of my stomach. Something about this scene wasn't right. The tents were still perfectly erected, not collapsed as if in a hurry. Sleeping bags lay unzipped inside, as if their occupants had simply vanished. Near one of the tents, I found a smartphone. Its screen cracked but still glowing faintly. The last opened app was the camera, and curiosity got the better of me. I swiped through the photos, each one showing smiling faces around a campfire, until I reached the last image. It was blurry, taken in low light, but I could make out a dark shape at the edge of the frame, something tall and oddly proportioned lurking just beyond the campfire's glow. A chill ran down my spine, and I quickly pocketed the phone. Evidence, I told myself. I'd turn it in when I got back to the station. But deep down, a part of me wanted to hurl it into the falls and pretend I'd never seen it. As I resumed my cleanup, movement caught the corner of my eye. I turned, half expecting to see a curious deer or perhaps a fellow hiker. Instead, my blood ran cold at what I saw partially hidden behind a massive fallen log. It was a boot, a hiking boot to be precise, still attached to a human leg, and beyond that, I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to vomit. What lay scattered on the forest floor was unmistakably human, but it no longer resembled a person in any meaningful way. With trembling hands, I reached for my radio. This was way beyond a simple trash pickup now. As I called in for backup, my eyes darted around the campsite, suddenly aware that whatever had done this might still be out there, watching, waiting. Little did I know this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would push me to the very limits of sanity and survival. I crouched down for a closer look and saw the deep grooves dug into the earth. That's when I noticed the smell. Not the rotting food or trash. It was something else, something metallic and sharp that clung to the back of my throat. I followed it, drawn to the edge of the campsite, where the trail dipped into the thick underbrush. There I found what was left of a person. At first I didn't process what I was looking at. It was as if my brain refused to acknowledge it. There wasn't much left, just pieces, scattered across the ground like someone had tossed a bag of bones into the air and let them fall where they may. The torso, what little remained, was mangled beyond recognition. The face, while there wasn't a face, just pieces. I've seen animal attacks before. This wasn't that. The way the body was torn apart wasn't natural. It was as if whatever did this wasn't just killing to eat, it was killing to destroy. I radioed for backup, trying to keep my voice steady. I was alone, miles from the nearest ranger station, and now fully aware that something dangerous was out here with me. Protocol said I should wait for reinforcements, but my gut told me I didn't have time to sit around. Whatever did this was still out there. I armed myself with the only weapons I had, a heavy-duty flashlight and the knife I kept strapped to my belt. Not exactly confidence-inspiring, but it was better than nothing. I started back toward the trailhead, figuring it was best to get out of there until help arrived. That's when I heard the first snap of a branch behind me. I stopped dead in my tracks, straining to listen. The noise came again, closer this time. A rustling in the underbrush like something or someone moving quietly through the dense forest. I turned, shining my flashlight into the trees, but the beam was swallowed by the darkness. For a moment, everything was still. Then something moved, just at the edge of the light. A shadow, tall and hulking, slipping between the trees with an unnatural grace. I didn't wait to see what it was, I ran. I know. Running in the woods at night is about the dumbest thing you can do, but instinct took over. I wasn't thinking anymore, just reacting. The path was uneven, and I could feel the weight of whatever was chasing me closing in. I could hear its breath, wet and heavy, the snap of branches growing louder behind me. Then, out of nowhere, something barreled into me from behind. I hit the ground hard, my flashlight flying from my hand as I tumbled through the underbrush. Pain shot through my side, and I scrambled to get up, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I turned to face it, and there it was. I'm not sure how to describe what I saw. It was like looking at something that didn't belong, something wrong. It had the rough shape of a wolf but taller, hunched over like a man, with muscles rippling beneath a coat of matted fur. Its mouth was lined with rows of teeth, but they didn't look like teeth. They looked like shards of broken glass, jagged and irregular. Its limbs were long, twisted, almost human but not quite right, like someone had stretched and bent them too far. For a split second, I thought about the gun I didn't have. Smart move, right? I never bothered carrying one out here because, what the hell, I wasn't expecting to run into anything worse than a bear. Well, lesson learned. I stumbled backward, but the thing just stood there, watching me, like it was sizing me up. I thought it might pounce, but it didn't. Instead, it let out this low, rumbling sound. Not quite a growl, more like the deep hum of a machine, like the woods themselves were vibrating. I took that as my cue to move fast. I sprinted toward the trailhead, my lungs burning, every muscle screaming at me to stop, but I didn't dare look back. I could hear it following me just behind the trees, its massive body crashing through the branches. Somehow, I made it back to my truck. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and floored the gas pedal. The thing burst from the tree line just as my tires spun out on the dirt road, its enormous body hurtling toward me like a freight train. I didn't stop until I was halfway back to the station, breathing so hard I thought my chest might explode. The authorities arrived the next day, but by then the campsite was a ghost town. The bodies, or what was left of them, were collected and the area was shut down. Officially, it was listed as a wild animal attack. I didn't argue. Who would believe me anyway? No one talks about it now. The park closed off that section permanently, citing environmental concerns. They put up signs, warnings to keep out, but nothing about the real danger. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for someone else to make the mistake of thinking the woods are safe. I spent the next few weeks in a daze. The official story was that a rogue bear had attacked the campsite. My encounter was chalked up to trauma and fear-induced hallucination. I knew better, but I kept my mouth shut. Who'd believe me anyway? Sleep became my enemy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing, its glass-shard teeth gleaming in the moonlight. I'd wake up in cold sweats, convinced I could hear that low, mechanical hum just outside my window. Work became impossible. Every rustle in the bushes, every snapped twig sent my heart racing. I jumped at shadows and flinched at the sound of the wind. My colleagues noticed, of course. They tried to be understanding, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. Poor Sam, they must have thought, he's lost it. I started researching, digging into the park's history, looking for any similar incidents. Most of what I found was typical stuff: bear attacks, the occasional mountain lion sighting. But then I stumbled upon something interesting, an old newspaper article from 1952, yellowed and faded, about a group of loggers who disappeared in the same area. Their camp was found in disarray, with claw marks on the trees and strange tracks in the mud. The search party gave up after a week, chalking it up to a tragic accident. But the details, they were too similar to ignore. The abandoned camp, the strange tracks, the feeling of being watched. It couldn't be a coincidence. I became obsessed. My apartment walls became covered with maps, newspaper clippings, and blurry photographs. I spent hours online scouring forums and chat rooms for any mention of similar creatures. Most of what I found was obviously fake, but there were a few accounts that rang true. A hiker in the Cascades who saw something not quite animal, not quite human, watching her from the trees. A hunter in British Columbia who found his cabin torn apart by something with hands like a man but claws like a beast. The more I dug, the more I became convinced that what I saw wasn't unique. There was something out there, something that had been lurking in the shadows of the Pacific Northwest for decades, maybe centuries. But knowing didn't make it easier. If anything, it made it worse. Because now I knew that no matter how far I ran, no matter where I hid, that thing was out there. And someday, somehow, I might encounter it again. Months passed. I quit my job at the park, moved back to the city, tried to forget. But the nightmares persisted, and the fear never really went away. It just sat there, a cold lump in the pit of my stomach, waiting. Then, one day, I got a call. It was Leanne, one of my old colleagues from the park. Her voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the undercurrent of panic. "Sam," she said, "it's happening again." My blood ran cold. I knew instantly what she meant. "Where?" I asked, already reaching for my keys. "Crescent Lake. A family of 4. They found the remains this morning." I should have said no. Should have hung up the phone and booked the first flight to anywhere but here, but I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew this wouldn't stop until someone did something about it. "I'm on my way," I said. The drive back to Olympic National Park was the longest of my life. Every mile brought back memories I'd tried so hard to bury. The smell of pine and damp earth. The way the mist clung to the trees like ghostly fingers. And always, always the feeling of being watched. Leanne met me at the ranger station. Her face was pale, drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "I shouldn't have called you," she said as soon as I got out of the car. "This isn't your problem anymore." "Yes, it is," I replied. "It became my problem the moment I saw that thing in the woods. Now tell me everything." She filled me in as we drove to Crescent Lake. The family, a couple and their 2 kids, had been camping near the lake's northern shore. When they didn't check in as scheduled, a search party was sent out. What they found, well, it was eerily similar to what I'd seen at Moonfalls. "The official story is a bear attack," Leanne said, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "But you and I both know that's not true." I nodded, my throat tight. Have you seen it, the creature? She shook her head. No, but I've heard it. That sound you described, like a machine humming? I heard it last night while we were searching. It made my skin crawl. We arrived at the lake as the sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. Any other time it would have been beautiful. Now it just felt ominous, like the forest was holding its breath waiting. The campsite had been cordoned off with yellow police tape. A few rangers and local law enforcement milled about, their faces grim. Leanne flashed her badge, and we ducked under the tape. The scene was horrifyingly familiar. The tents were shredded, sleeping bags spilled out like gutted animals. Personal belongings were scattered everywhere, a child's stuffed animal, a novel with a bookmark still in place, a family photo lying face up in the dirt, and the smell. That metallic, coppery scent that I'd never quite forgotten. It hung in the air, thick and cloying. Jesus, I muttered, fighting the urge to gag. It's exactly the same, Leanne nodded, her face pale. What do we do, Sam? We can't let this keep happening. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. We need to find it, track it, and then what? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I met her eyes, saw the fear there, but also the determination. Then we end this, once and for all. As the last light faded from the sky, we gathered our gear. Flashlights, radios, first aid kits. I'd brought my old hunting rifle, a relic from my father that I'd never thought I'd use. It felt inadequate against the memory of that creature, but it was better than nothing. We set out into the gathering darkness, the beam of our flashlights cutting through the mist. The forest was alive with night sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. But underlying it all was a tension, a wrongness that set my teeth on edge. Stay close, I murmured to Leanne. And whatever happens, don't run. That's what it wants. She nodded, her face set in grim determination. We moved deeper into the woods, following a trail of broken branches and disturbed earth. The trail of a predator, of our predator. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Eyes in the darkness following our every move. More than once I spun around, sure I'd seen movement in the corner of my eye, only to find nothing but shadows. Then, suddenly, the forest went silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the sound of our own breathing and the pounding of my heart. Sam, Leanne whispered, her voice tight with fear. Do you hear that? I did. A low, mechanical hum, so deep I felt it more than heard it. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere, filling the air with its ominous vibration. It's here, I said, raising my rifle. Stay alert. We stood back to back, scanning the darkness. The humming grew louder, closer. I could feel it in my bones, in my teeth. My finger tightened on the trigger, and then, without warning, it was upon us. The creature burst from the underbrush with explosive force, a mass of fur and muscle and gleaming teeth. In the harsh beam of our flashlights, it looked even more nightmarish than I remembered. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural intelligence, fixed on us with predatory focus. Leanne screamed, the sound piercing through the night. I raised my rifle and fired, the report deafening in the confined space of the forest. The creature flinched as the bullet struck its shoulder, but it didn't go down. Instead, it let out a roar that shook the very ground beneath our feet. Run, I yelled, grabbing Leanne's arm and pulling her along. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces. I could hear the creature behind us, its massive body tearing through the forest with terrifying ease. We burst into a small clearing, moonlight streaming through a gap in the canopy. I spun around, rifle raised, as the creature emerged from the tree line. It stalked towards us, its movements a horrifying blend of animal grace and human intelligence. What do we do? Leanne gasped, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer. The rifle felt like a toy in my hands, useless against this impossible being. But we couldn't run, couldn't hide. There was nowhere left to go. As the creature approached, something changed in its eyes. The predatory gleam faded, replaced by something almost curious. It cocked its head to one side, studying us with an unsettling intensity, and then, to my utter shock, it spoke. The voice was deep, guttural, like rocks grinding together, but the words were clear. Why have you come? I exchanged a stunned glance with Leanne. This was beyond anything we had imagined. We came to stop you, I managed to say, my voice shaking. To protect people from you. The creature made a sound that might have been a laugh. Protect? You know nothing of protection, of survival. What are you? Leanne asked, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. The creature's gaze shifted to her. We are the old ones, the forgotten. We have walked these forests since before your kind learned to make fire. My mind reeled. This wasn't just some animal. This was something ancient, something that defied our understanding of the natural world. Why are you killing people? I demanded. We do not kill for sport, as your kind does, the creature growled. We kill to survive, to protect our territory, as we have always done. But why now? Leanne pressed. Why are the attacks increasing? The creature's eyes narrowed. Your world encroaches on ours. Your machines, your noise, your endless expansion. We are being pushed into smaller and smaller spaces. We fight back the only way we know how. I lowered my rifle, my hands shaking. There has to be another way, I said. A way for us to coexist. The creature regarded me for a long moment. Perhaps, it said finally. But it is not for me to decide. I am but one of many. There are more of you? Leanne asked, her voice a mix of fear and fascination. More than you can imagine, the creature replied. Hidden in the deep places of the world. Watching, waiting, a chill ran down my spine at the implications of its words. How many other creatures like this were out there, lurking in the shadows of our world? What happens now? I asked, acutely aware of how vulnerable we were. The creature's gaze swept over us, considering. You will leave this place, it said finally, and you will tell your kind to stay away. This is our territory. Respect that, and we will have no quarrel. And if we don't? Leanne asked. The creature's lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing those glass-shard teeth. Then what has happened here will be only the beginning. With that, it turned and loped back into the forest, disappearing into the darkness as silently as it had appeared. Leanne and I stood in stunned silence for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes wide. What do we do now, Sam? I took a deep breath, my mind racing. We do what it said. We leave. And then we have to make a decision. The walk back to our vehicle was silent, both Leanne and I lost in our own thoughts. The forest around us seemed different now, alive in a way I'd never noticed before. Every shadow held the potential for another creature, every rustle in the undergrowth a possible threat. As we reached the ranger station, the first light of dawn was starting to peek over the horizon. We sat in Leanne's truck, neither of us quite ready to leave the relative safety of the vehicle. We can't just ignore this, Sam, Leanne said finally, breaking the silence. People have died. More will die if we don't do something. I nodded, running a hand through my hair. I know. But what can we do? Who would believe us? We have evidence, she insisted. The bodies, the claw marks, our own testimony, and risk exposing these creatures to the world, I asked. You heard what it said. They're fighting back because we're encroaching on their territory. What do you think would happen if the general public found out about them? Leanne was quiet for a moment, considering. Mass panic, she admitted finally. Hunting parties, military intervention. Exactly, I said. It would be a bloodbath. For both sides. So what, we just keep it a secret? Let people keep dying? I shook my head. No. We find a middle ground. We increase patrols in the affected areas. Put up more warning signs. Maybe even close off certain sections of the park permanently. And if that's not enough, I met her eyes, seeing my own fear and uncertainty reflected there. Then we come back. We find a way to communicate with them, negotiate. Leanne let out a humorless laugh. Negotiate with ancient forest creatures. Never thought I'd see the day. Welcome to the new normal, I said, managing a weak smile. We spent the next few hours drafting a report. We left out any mention of speaking creatures or ancient beings, focusing instead on the physical evidence. Unusual tracks, signs of extreme strength, the pattern of the attacks. We recommended increased security measures and suggested that certain areas of the park be designated as strictly off-limits to the public. As we finished, Leanne turned to me. Do you think this will be enough? I wished I could give her a definitive answer. I don't know, I admitted, but it's a start, and it's the best we can do for now. She nodded, then surprised me by pulling me into a tight hug. Thank you, she whispered, for coming back, for helping. I hugged her back, realizing for the first time how much I'd missed this place, despite everything that had happened. Anytime, I said. As we pulled apart, a thought occurred to me. You know, I said, I might stick around for a while, help implement these new measures. Leanne's face lit up. Really? You'd come back? I nodded, surprising myself with how right it felt. Someone needs to keep an eye on things. Might as well be me. As we walked out of the station, the morning sun warming our faces, I felt a mix of emotions. Fear, certainly, uncertainty about what the future held, but also a sense of purpose, of being exactly where I needed to be. The forest stretched out before us, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. And somewhere out there, hidden in the shadows, ancient eyes watched and waited. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Our report, sanitized though it was, caused quite a stir among park management. New protocols were put in place, warning signs were updated. Certain areas were cordoned off, listed as ecological preservation zones. I threw myself into the work, grateful for the distraction. During the day, I led patrols, checked trail cameras, and helped train other rangers on what to look for. At night, I pored over maps and reports, trying to piece together a clearer picture of the creature's territory and habits. Leanne was invaluable, her scientific mind bringing a level of rigor to our research that I couldn't match. We spent countless evenings in her office, comparing notes and theories, our walls covered in photos and diagrams. The attacks stopped, at least for a while. Whether it was because of our increased presence or some decision on the creature's part, I couldn't say. But I didn't let my guard down. Couldn't. The memory of those glass shard teeth and inhuman eyes was etched too deeply into my mind. It was on a crisp autumn morning, about 6 months after our encounter, that things changed again. I was out on a solo patrol, checking a remote camera we'd set up near one of the creature sightings. As I approached the camera, I noticed something odd. The ground around it was disturbed, as if something large had been rooting around. My heart rate picked up as I drew closer. The camera was intact, but it had been moved, angled to point at a nearby tree. And there, carved into the bark with impossible precision, was a message. "We are watching. Do not forget." I stumbled back, my mind reeling. They were intelligent, yes, but this was communication on a whole new level. As I stood there trying to process what I was seeing, I became aware of a presence behind me. I turned slowly, my hand instinctively going to the tranquilizer gun at my hip. We'd switched from lethal weapons months ago, on my insistence. Not that I thought it would do much good against these creatures, but it was better than nothing. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood one of them. Not the same one from our encounter. This one was smaller, its fur a different shade. But the eyes were the same, ancient, intelligent, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then, slowly, deliberately, it nodded its massive head, a gesture of acknowledgement, of mutual understanding, and then it was gone, melting back into the forest so quickly I might have thought I'd imagined it, if not for the message carved into the tree. I reported the incident to Leanne, of course. We added it to our growing file of encounters and evidence, but we kept it between us. Some things we decided were better left undisclosed. As the years passed, a strange sort of equilibrium developed. The creatures kept to their territory, for the most part. We kept people out of those areas. There were still occasional incidents, a hiker who strayed too far off the marked trails, a camper who ignored the warnings, but they were few and far between. Sometimes, on my patrols, I'd catch glimpses of them. A shadow moving through the trees, eyes gleaming in the darkness. Once, I found a half-eaten deer carcass left conspicuously on a trail, as if to remind us of their presence. I never felt entirely safe in the woods again. How could I, knowing what I knew? But I also felt connected. Part of something ancient and powerful, a keeper of a secret that would change the world if it ever got out. Leanne and I continued our research, documenting everything we could. We knew that someday, somehow, the truth would come out. And when it did, we wanted to be prepared, to be the voices of reason in what would undoubtedly be a storm of fear and knee-jerk reactions. As for me, I found a strange sort of peace in my new role. Guardian, researcher, mediator between two worlds. It wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself, but it was a life with purpose, with meaning. And on quiet nights, when the mist rolled in and the forest came alive with shadows, I'd sit on my porch and listen. For the snap of a branch, the rustle of leaves, the low, mechanical hum that still haunted my dreams. They were out there, watching, waiting. And so was I.